forefront of our minds. It's also about our ability to amplify their message and to send a message to those that would do them harm that we have our eyes on them.
Point of order, Kevin Brennan.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I ask your advice on a point of order? In the earlier exchange with the Leader of the House, I raised the case of a constituent of mine whose husband had been executed by the Iranian regime and the asylum case. And I was genuinely shocked, not many things shocked me in this place, that the Leader, in her response, quite rightly doing what she does to defend government policy, but failed to even emote a simple scintilla of sympathy about the situation that my constituent has been placed in. Is there any mechanism under standing orders available by which the Leader of the House might be able to come to the dispatch box and perhaps express that sympathy and even perhaps do what she's done with other constituents and offer to take the case to the Home Office for further scrutiny?
Yeah. Well, the Leader of the House is at the dispatch box, so I think what I will first do is ask the Leader of the House if she clearly wishes to respond. Leader of the House.
I'm sorry if I did not appear sympathetic to the particular situation. I'm very sympathetic to the situation, and if there is something that he thinks I can do to assist, of course I will. I always make that offer to members of this House. But I would just say and reiterate to the honourable gentleman, if he wants the asylum system to work well, if he wants the finite resource we have to be focused on those people in all parts of the world who need our support, if he wants us to be able to make a judgment about taking disabled children from a Syrian camp because we are the kind of country that can give them the right support that they need, then he needs to help us stop the boats and get this situation under control. I have always tried to work in a collegiate way. I can understand the honourable gentleman's frustration at the current situation. I'm frustrated at that situation too, and we intend to do something about it.
Well, as I think it's important that I respond to the honourable gentleman's point of order. As he knows, I am not responsible for the answers of ministers. However, he has put his point forward. The Leader has responded, and I suggest that we leave it at that. Thank you. Thank you. The Clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Supply and Appropriation, Anticipation and Adjustments Bill, second reading.
Now.
Minister to move formally.
Formally.
The question is that the bill be now read a second time. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that the bill be now read the third time. As many as are of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. And we now come to the backbench debate on International Women's Day. Dame Maria Miller to move.
And can I say how great it is to see you in the chair, Madam Deputy Speaker, for this now annual event on the floor of the House of Commons. And can I thank the Backbench Business Committee for granting us this time, and also for members of the all-party parliamentary group on Women in Parliament who put forward the idea of a debate yet again. And it's a great privilege to be able to open this debate. And I'll start by recognising the incredible achievements of every single female Member of Parliament in the House of Commons, and every female parliamentarian, not just in this chamber but at the other end as well. I've been fortunate to have so many women helping me throughout my life, family, friends, work colleagues and fellow parliamentarians, and I'd like to particularly say how inspired I am by my colleagues on both sides of the House for their tenacity, their ability to make change happen, and their resilience to get anything that gets in their way out of the way so they can get things done. I salute you all for what you've already achieved and what you will go on to achieve in the future. And I'd like to particularly pay a particularly fond tribute to two women in my party, Madam Deputy Speaker, the Right Honourable Member for Epping Forest, Madam Deputy Speaker, and also my Right Honourable friend, the Member for Windsor and Maidenhead, because both of whom have really gone out of their way to make sure that they encourage women in my party to be the best they can be. And it would not be proper to not also remember the late Cheryl Gillan, who on our side of the House was the mother of our party, and we miss her greatly. She was an amazing colleague.
Will my right honourable friend give way?
Of course.
Thank you. I thank my right honourable friend for giving way, and the right honourable member for Basingstoke is one of my inspirations in this House. But I think it's really important that we are able to talk quite openly about how much respect we have for colleagues across the House, because I look across on the opposite benches and I can see a number of women who not only have I followed since I've been in this place, but also I followed their work before I became an MP. So I think just to remind everybody that as much as you see the ding-dongs on the telly box, that actually a lot of us get on and a lot of us are trying to make big changes here together.
An excellent friend from an excellent comment from my friend. She's absolutely right. And Madam Deputy Speaker, I should at this stage point out there are a couple of us on this bench who haven't actually slept overnight. So please forgive us if we stumble over our words. We flew back on the red eye from the UNCSW. No, Madam Deputy Speaker, a lot tamer than that. Of course, I give way to the Honourable Lady.
I thank the Right Honourable Lady for giving way, and I'm moved to intervene because she mentions Cheryl Gillan, and whilst there might have been many things we disagreed on, there were also many things we did agree on, and she did incredible work on the matter of autism and championing neurodiversity. But also when I joined PACE, the Council of Europe, she was really a very supportive member and somebody who helped show me the way, and she is much missed across all benches.
Hear, hear. And can I thank the Honourable Lady for those kind comments, and I think it really does demonstrate how we do work together and how we do have shared interests. And this was just referring back to our venture to the United Nations Commission on the Status of Women earlier this week. I was chairing a panel of young women, and they were asking about how we work together, where the political divides were. And I have to say I used Jo Cox's words, which is there's more that unites us than divides us. And I think that that is also another thing that I would like to remember today very fondly. Having women in Parliament and in leadership really matters, we know that, because it changes the conversation. It changes the discussion, and above all, it changes the decisions that are made, both here and in organisations around the country and around the world. So to mark International Women's Day, at the start of this week, I led one of 4 delegations of UK parliamentarians to UNCSW, the Commission on the Status of Women. My delegation was from the APBG on UN Women, and we'd like to thank the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association for their support in helping that delegation happen. At CSW in New York, thousands of women from around the world met to discuss the status of women. As I said, 4 delegations from our Parliament, 18 honourable and right honourable members, and also noble members from the House of Lords at this global event. Now, the event was, at times, harrowing, and I'm sure my honourable friend, the member for Chelmsford, will draw on some of her work while she was there. It was harrowing to hear, particularly directly from women who were there from Afghanistan or Ukraine and other parts of the world, Colombia, Mexico, who were talking about their own personal experiences, particularly around sexual harassment and worse. The Afghan women we heard from talked about the brutal beatings, the torture and worse, but they're still there, prepared to protest, to regain the hard-won rights of the past 2 decades, and to hear from women in Iran living with a brutal regime. You know, we must continue to play our part in this Parliament, as we have a proud tradition of doing so, keeping these women's plight at the fore and making sure their need for support and change is never forgotten. Of course, I'll give way to the
Honourable Lady. It's been difficult to watch as women's rights have been stripped away in Afghanistan since the withdrawal of troops. Now Afghan women who were divorced, able to escape abusive marriages under the previous government, have found those divorces nullified and themselves at risk under adultery laws. Does the Right Honourable Member agree that the government must pick up the pace in the ACRS to ensure that we can offer sanctuary to those women?
I think in bringing this up, the Honourable Lady is doing what we all must do, which is to raise these issues in public. And that's what, in fact, the Afghan women I met were pleading for, to make sure that their plight was not forgotten. And they were enormously grateful for members, right honourable members, raising these issues, so that not only does the world media not forget, but also our colleagues on the front bench, on the Treasury bench, don't forget us either. Give way to the honourable gentleman.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I commend the Right Honourable Leader for bringing this forward. Unfortunately, I have a meeting today and I can't participate in this debate. But there's not just the politicians across the world, it's also the likes of my mother, 91, soon to be 92 years old, who still gets up to make fresh scones, drives a car, looks after my brother who is disabled. It's also my wife who runs the home, volunteers in animal shelter, cares for the grandchildren, gives the childcare to help them make ends meet. And as a grandfather of 3 beautiful and wonderfully sassy granddaughters who I believe will change the world, and the proud employer of 6 fiercely strong, independent and intelligent women, my point is clear. Does the Right Honourable Lady not agree that on this day, and indeed every day, we have much to be thankful for all the women in our lives who have shaped us and continue to shape our world in a better place?
And can I thank the honourable gentleman for that intervention? And he's always a great supporter of women, but he brings up a very important issue, which is women have many different roles in this country, in our national life, and we should celebrate all of those roles in this debate today. But I think above all, we need to make sure that women have the choice as to what role that they want to take on, and we should never allow barriers to get in the way of them succeeding and reaching their potential in life, and I'm sure his sassy granddaughters would agree with that. The Commission on the Status of Women, as well as being at times harrowing, was also enormously uplifting, because it was empowering to hear from other female parliamentarians and also NGO leaders and activists about how they're working and campaigning for change. And I also had the great pleasure of being able to meet with the Speaker of the Belize Parliament, Valerie Woods, the Honourable Woods, who also is Deputy Chairman of the Commonwealth Women Parliamentarians. And I know that the Interparliamentary Union also had many meetings at CSW. And this just serves to remind us the importance of organisations like the CPA and the IPU in the life not only of our Parliament, but of parliaments around the world. And they're incredibly useful organisations for women to be able to be driving change and learning from other parliaments. As I said, the UK Parliament had 4 delegations, the biggest group ever to be in CSW. I think demonstrating, Madam Deputy Speaker, that the significant importance of women's rights amongst colleagues across the House has never been more heightened. And at the UN this week, thousands of women from across the world saw laid bare the global erosion of women's rights since the Beijing Declaration was adopted in 1995. The reversal of Roe versus Wade, 4 million women and girls out of education in Afghanistan, women in Ukraine rendered victims of sexual violence at the hands of aggressors, and closer to home, with 2 women murdered by their partners each week in the UK. And I'm sure my honourable friend, the member for Yardley, will be talking about that in her contribution to the debate today. Now, there's no doubt that here in the UK over the past decade, huge amounts of progress have been made. And I'd like to pay tribute to the Minister on the front bench, the Minister for Women, and her predecessors, of which I'm one, for all that they've done to make sure that we continue to see momentum when it comes to women's rights. And I know my honourable friend, the Minister, has done so much with regards to women's health particularly, and I pay tribute to the work that she's done in that area. And while I'm going to speak on some of the challenges we have to face and ways to address them, it's important to keep in the back of our minds that huge progress that we've made as women and the huge contribution that women make to public life, making this place and other places better as a result. And how do I know that this place is better for having women in it? Why, it's important that we continue to push for more women to enter public office, because true representation is the answer to that question. Representation, and good representation, strong representation and diverse representation is vital in political life, because encourages trust in political bodies, and engagement in democracy is stronger when people see themselves in their elected representatives. Representation tends to also result in diversity, and diversity in turn results in greater range of ideas, which for a deliberative system like our democracy is hugely important to improve our decision making. In the business world, research by McKinsey found that for every 10% increase in gender diversity in senior executive teams in the UK, earnings in that company before interest and tax rose by more than 3%. So there's actually a dividend, not just, I think, for commercial organisations, but also for organisations like ours to ensure that that diversity is in place. Of course, I give way to the Honourable Lady.
The Right Honourable Lady's been very generous. I was at a Balfa aviation event last week where it was pointed out that women remain significantly underrepresented in more senior roles, with only 6% of pilots women. The training is incredibly expensive, and we've heard about the barriers to becoming a high earner that many women face. Does the Right Honourable Member agree that the Government could be providing more financial support aimed at encouraging women into industries like aviation where they are underrepresented?
The Honourable Lady is bringing up a very important point about pilots, particularly. I know her point is slightly broader than that. Some of the issues that pilots face in staying qualified to fly if they have children is one of the reasons, having met that sector of the industry a number of years ago, is one of the reasons why they see such a hemorrhaging of women out of the industry. But I think her point is broader. I would just say that over the last decade and a half, we have made some important progress in getting in place the idea and the notion that having more women in senior roles and organisations is important. But when it comes to STEM, I actually think the Treasury bench should be singing much louder than they do sometimes on the success they've had in putting STEM first and foremost in young women's minds. And when you look at the graduates coming out of our universities now versus the graduates that are coming out of our universities in STEM subjects in 2010, actually there are more women now than men coming out with STEM degrees. And I don't think we shout about that enough. But she's right, those women are still on a junior level. We need to make sure that the barriers have been removed so they don't, as we see in the pilots, in the case of pilots, they don't end up having to move out of that industry because barriers are in their way. But she makes a very important point. In the business world, research from McKinsey found, as I say, that gender diversity increases earnings, and that companies in the top quartile for diversity outperform their industry medians. And McKinsey believe that this is because diverse companies are better able to win talent, to improve customer understanding, improve employee satisfaction and decision-making, and leading to what they call a virtuous circle. And if diversity can improve our businesses, it can improve our Parliament too. And where our performance metrics are not found on balance sheets, they are found in terms of the decisions we're making for the future of our country. Diversity in deliberative processes, by which I mean the voices from more backgrounds, bringing new ideas from different life experiences, is foundational to what we do here. And the Centre for Talent Innovation identified that 56% of leaders don't value ideas they don't personally see the need for. And given that we know that women have experiences of life which are very different to their male counterparts, you can see from that figure how important it is that we have more women at, not only in this chamber, but at the decision-making table of government. So what is the solution? We need diversity in leadership. And having women central in our debates adds legitimacy to our democratic process, and it means that our work in scrutiny is done in a more rounded and full way, and policy can be made that more fully encompasses the needs and the dreams of the people we serve. Now, the UK electorate and all electorates are half women, so representing women's voices here is directly important to at least half of our constituents. Gender equality in Parliament is all about democracy and improving our democracy, and it's clear to see that why it's important that we make an effort, an ever-increasing effort, to ensure that diversity can thrive in this Parliament. Now, our Parliament has come a long way, and we have a very reforming Speaker who has put the role of parliamentarians front and centre in this place, and has also picked up some of the issues that are incredibly important to women, not only coming into Parliament, but staying in Parliament. And I'm thinking particularly here about personal security. But can I say that our Speaker has also inherited an enormous backlog of issues that haven't been tackled for a whole variety of reasons in recent years. And it's my belief that the House of Commons must continue to renew its energies in this area to make sure that it's not only the political parties who are working hard to get more women into the House of Commons, but also it's the House of Commons itself that is appealing, a place that people want to come and have a career. Because the women who have the capacity and the capabilities and maybe even the personality to come into Parliament have got a lot of choices, a lot of different ways they can use their lives. And if we don't make sure that the people who have the best capacity are attracted to come to Parliament, as well as have I think, a vocation, then we're going to be missing out on the brightest and the best, which is often a phrase that is given to me when I talk about this issue, given to me by ministers who are responsible. Now, one of the ways that we can make sure that we are increasing the appeal of our Parliament is through gender-sensitive audits, to make sure that we have an understanding of what it is that makes our Parliament strong, but also where we could improve it to make it more appealing for women in the future. And I'd like to really pay tribute to the Interparliamentary Union, who developed the concept of gender-sensitive parliaments in 2010. And since then, multiple parliaments around the world, including our own, have conducted gender-sensitive audits to see how they fare. This was then developed further by the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association, who've put together a toolkit to make it easier for parliaments of all sorts to be able to implement an audit in this way. Now, can the Honourable Lady forgive me, otherwise I might incur the wrath of Madam Deputy Speaker, I think. Now, the point of gender sensitivity is to create environments in which both men and women can operate equally, and there are 7 key aspects: the numbers and positions of women, the legal and policy framework of the legislature, mainstreaming of gender equality, the culture, environment and policies of Parliament, and the role of political parties and the position of parliamentary staff. Now, all of these aspects can tell us a lot about how men and women are faring in their parliaments. The House of Commons conducted a gender-sensitive audit in 2018, which is really welcome. But you know what? 2018 feels like a long time ago, and for some colleagues here, they weren't even here then. So we need to make sure that our audit of Parliament and how it works for people today, not 3 or 4 years ago, is foremost in our minds. Now, it's clear that there's more to do, and I'll just refer here briefly to the Fawcett Society's report, A House for Everyone, that colleagues I'm sure are familiar with, which was published in December, which brought into focus the problems around the retention of female parliamentarians, something which I know colleagues on both sides of the House are concerned about. Now, the number of women in Parliament, taken as a snapshot, is all well and good, but Fawcett's work reveals that women, because they face disproportionate challenges, tend to stay in Parliament for at least a term shorter in time than men, which means that we don't get the opportunity for those women to be able to reach the seniority or the experience that their male counterparts do. Now, in terms of what we do next, the All-Party Parliamentary Group for Women in Parliament is going to be producing a work stream to make sure that we have a clear plan for how we get to an equal parliament by 2028 rather, to coincide with the centenary of the Equal Franchise Act. And I hope that when that work plan is put into place, that we can share it here through further debate in Parliament. Madam Deputy Speaker, it is a great pleasure to be able to open this debate today. Can I, on behalf of those colleagues who are still at CSW in New York, say happy International Women's Day for yesterday to everybody in the chamber, for those who are watching at home, and to encourage everybody who's here and who's watching to ensure that when it comes to looking at a legacy from our time in Parliament, that by encouraging and achieving the objective of having more women on these green benches will make this place a fairer and even stronger parliamentary democracy. Thank you.
The question is, as on the order paper, Dame Diana Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Could I start by paying tribute to the Right Honourable Member for Basingstoke for opening this debate and for all her work over the years for women. And I share her comments about celebrating the wonderful women parliamentarians that we have and all their achievements. And it's very good to see you, Madam Deputy Speaker, in the chair this afternoon, and our excellent female clerks at the table in the chamber too. When my honourable friend from Birmingham Yardley reads out during this International Women's Day debate the list of UK women killed each year, it is truly heartbreaking, and it's a reminder of the dangers that women and girls face in our country. And 3 years ago, my constituent, Libby Squire, was on that list. A young woman studying at Hull University whose life was taken in 2019 by a predatory man who had been prowling the streets of Hull looking for a victim. But Libby's murder was not an out-of-the-blue attack. In the 16 months before Libby's rape and murder, the perpetrator committed a string of sexually motivated offences, including indecent exposure, masturbating in public, spying on women through their windows, and stealing sex toys and underwear. Now, what we know is that the behaviour of men who expose themselves is very sadly, devastatingly, everyday, common and normalised. And when I asked women MPs earlier this week about their experiences of men indecently exposing themselves, everyone had a story, be it outside their sixth form college, on public transport, or on the way to school. And just today, I received a letter from an 80-year-old woman who recalls being a victim of indecent exposure when she was 18. And she still lives with the impact of that assault 62 years later. But what we actually found out at the trial for Libby was that many of Libby's killer's earlier crimes had not been reported to the police. And we ask ourselves, why was that? And what we know is because victims often feel they would not be taken seriously by the police, and reporting would not have actually triggered any action. We also know that these crimes are committed by predators, and they can be precursors to more extreme violent behaviour. And we ignore these warning signs, these red flags, at our peril. Earlier this week, Wayne Couzens was sentenced to 19 months for indecent exposure, having committed a string of non-contact sexual offences in the year before his arrest. One of these incidents happened just days before he kidnapped, raped and murdered Sarah Everard. And that was when he exposed himself to staff at a McDonald's drive-through. In handing down the sentence, Mrs Justice May reported that Wayne Couzens' ability to commit these deeds with impunity only strengthened the dangerous belief he had in his own invincibility. And so, very sadly, like Libby's murderer, the offences escalated. A review of evidence from 2014 found a quarter of men who exposed themselves went on to re-offend, with as many as 10% going on to commit serious sexual offences. I will, yes.
Is it not true that most people underestimate what an assault it is on a woman? And it only really when it happens to you do you really understand the impact. And it is so important that we listen to the women who have had that assault on them and understand the trauma that it has caused to them.
Absolutely, and I'm very grateful for that intervention. I think every woman in this chamber and watching this debate will fully understand the impact that it can have. Just to return to the statistics, since 2018, almost 250 men found guilty of indecent exposure have subsequently been found guilty of rape. Indecent exposure and non-contact sexual offences are gateway crimes that still are not taken seriously enough. And in the years since her daughter's murder, Libby's mum, the formidable Lisa Squire, has fought to raise the importance of reporting these low-level sexual offences. She has been working with Humberside Police on the Libby campaign to urge women to always report to the police and to call on women that these offences are not trivial, they're not harmless. If you are the victim, please report it to the police. It could save another woman's life. And she's already managed, alongside Humberside Police, to reach 17,000 young people in the Humberside area. Amazing. And she's also working with the Metropolitan Police and Thames Valley Police. And I spoke to Lisa this morning. She is a formidable woman, and I have no doubt at all that we will see change because of the work she's doing. Now, of course, reporting is not the only hurdle. And this week we heard from one of Cousin's victims. She said this in her impact assessment. 4 months after you exposed yourself to me, you raped and murdered an innocent woman. There were opportunities to identify you, and they were not taken. I did not feel that when I reported your crime, it was taken as seriously as I felt it should have been. Now, if women are going to report crimes, they must have faith that they will be believed, respected, and that action will be taken. And that, most importantly, the police themselves are not a danger. A recent analysis found that of the 10,000 indecent exposure cases logged by police in 2020, only 600 reached court. This is simply not enough. And I have proposed amendments to Home Office bills to try and tackle this issue, but the government sadly did not accept those amendments. I met with Home Office ministers, with Lisa Squire, to talk about what more the government could do. And as a chair of the Home Affairs Select Committee, I have raised this issue directly with the previous Home Secretary, the Right Honourable Member for Witham. Now, my view is the government must do much more on tackling violence against women and girls, and the Prime Minister has declared it a national emergency back in November. But he didn't make it one of his top 5 priorities. So why not make it the 6th priority? I think if this government will not accept this as a national emergency, I hope that the next government will. Indecent exposure is not a minor crime. We know it's frequently a stepping stone to escalating violence against women by predatory men. Perpetrators, though pathetic, are not harmless. They are often very dangerous. We must take this far more seriously. Doing so for Libby, for Sarah, and for all the women taken from us. And just like women down the years fighting for a cause, the suffragettes, the Bow Match Girls, the Ford Dagenham Equal Pay Strikers, and Hull's own headscarf revolutionaries, we will persevere with this. We will persevere and we will see change.
Yep.
Vicky Ford. Madam Deputy Speaker, it's absolutely wonderful to be back in the House Commons today. If I'm a bit bleary, it is because I've just got off the all-night red eye and a couple of hours sleep. And it was wonderful to be at the Commission on the Status of Women with members from all across this House, alongside my right honourable friend, the member for Basingstoke, and so much joy from so many thousands of women. It was the first time the Commissioners met in person for the past 4 years. It was a particularly moving moment yesterday lunchtime when we had a very informal lunch, a handful of British parliamentarians from this place and the other place, a Canadian senator, 2 young Mexican MPs, 3 Afghan women's rights champions, and 2 Ukrainian members of Parliament. Madam Deputy Speaker, the sisterhood is strong. There's so much I want to say that I thought to try and keep myself ordered, I would give you an A to Z. So here is my A to Z. Some happy, some sad. The A is for Afghanistan. 4 million girls not in school, women not allowed to work, women subjected to public floggings, rape and torture. It is gender apartheid at its worst. And what the Afghan women said to me yesterday, if an Afghan girl can't go to school, and if an Afghan woman can't leave her home, then why can the Taliban send their daughters, not just out of their homes, but out of their countries, to go to school in other countries? And the ask of the UK government is that we and allies put travel bans on the Taliban and do more to sanction their assets. The B is a network of paths in Chelmsford called the Bunny Walks. It was overcrowded, overgrown, dark and dangerous, a no-go zone for women. But thanks to Safer Streets funding from the UK government, it now has lights, it has CCTV, the undergrowth has been cut back, and it's now being enjoyed by women and men and people of all ages. So I would encourage colleagues from this place that if you do have dangerous parts of your constituency, do look at this Safer Streets funding. It makes a huge difference. C is for contraception. 257 million women want access to contraception but cannot get it. If a woman cannot control her own body, she has no control over the rest of her life. And women's rights to sexual health and reproductive services are being pushed back across the world. Yesterday, I visited the UNFPA, who do amazing work to prevent maternal mortality and to make sure that women have access to contraception. And they would like to pass their thanks on to the UK government for our leadership in the support that we give this vital organisation. D for domestic abuse, the most hideous of crimes. But really good news, actually, from Essex, that the reports of domestic abuse in Essex are actually down 8% this year. And I'd like to thank Essex Police, under the leadership of our Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner, Roger Hurst, for the huge focus that they have put on tackling domestic abuse. E for education. A child whose mother can read is 50% more likely to live beyond the age of 5, 50% more immunised, and twice as likely to attend school as that of a mother who cannot. So thank you to the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office for prioritising girls' education in the Women's and Girls' Strategy launched yesterday.
Thank you very much. And my right honourable friend is making a most excellent speech. And going back to Afghanistan, isn't very short-sighted of the Taliban to not educate girls, because an educated mother educates their children, and the educated child then produces a very productive society. So it's incredibly short-sighted to the Taliban.
This is exactly the point. When you educate the girls, you give benefits not just to the girls themselves, but to the whole society, not just in terms of greater economic growth from women being able to go out and work and create their own incomes, but actually societal benefits like the health benefits I've just mentioned. F is for freedom. So last month I met a survivor of domestic abuse who had just escaped from her violent partner with her 3 children. And I said to her, as Member of Parliament, is there anything more that we could do for you? And she looked me in the eye and said, no, Vicky, I've got everything. I'm free. With her arms like this. And may we have more of those free women. G for girls. Girls are our future, but we should not think that the experiences that girls are facing today are the same as the experiences we had when we grew up. Adolescent girls are disproportionately negatively affected by online harassment. We need to listen to them, understand their experiences, and let them inform us, especially as we seek to make laws and policies that affect them. H for the hijab and headscarves, and for the brave women of Iran who've prepared to risk their own lives because they believe in the right to choose whether or not they should have to wear one. I for impunity. Women as young as 4 and as old as in their 80s have been raped by Russian soldiers in Ukraine. Barbaric sexual violence committed by order of military commanders. We have to hold the perpetrators to account, take them to court and break the cycle of impunity on conflict-related sexual violence. J for Julia Jeeps, my association chairman. None of us would be here without the volunteers in our party. K for Kaja Kallas, the Prime Minister of Estonia. We need more strong women leaders in this world. K is also for Kenya, Somalia and Ethiopia, where the rains have just failed for the 5th season. Over 20 million people living in extreme food insecurity, mostly women and children. L for levelling up. This is not just a north-south issue. In Mid-Essex, from the 1st of April, women will have access to IVF on the NHS for the first time. So thank you to health ministers for ending the postcode lottery of health funding. M for marriage. Child marriage sometimes sounds like it could be a sort of romantic and beautiful thing, but it is so far that. A child who's entered into marriage so often faces rape, a life of slavery. And I'd like to say thank you and congratulations to the Honourable Member for Mid Derbyshire and the noble Baroness Sugg in the other place for the work that they have done, pulling through the private members' bill to make sure that no child, no person under the age of 18 can get married in this country. N for numeracy. Now, I'm a mathematician. There aren't very many mathematicians in this place, and there certainly aren't very many women mathematicians in this place, and we have to end this stigma that suggests that girls don't do maths. And I'm really celebrating that year after year we see more and more girls doing maths A-levels, and we should encourage them to continue to do more. O for online safety. There's some excellent measures in the online safety bill to protect women. The UN Special Rapporteur against Violence on Women and Girls gave a shout-out to the UK for our legislation in a meeting yesterday, particularly on the measures to prevent deep fake porn videos. But P is for pornography, and we need to do much more to tackle the online pornography that our children are coming across. They're watching, but often they're just stumbling across very violent pornography, as a result of which girls are increasingly being subjected to very violent sex. So I hope that the government will look favourably at the amendments that the noble Lord Bethel will be tabling in the other place. Q is for Queens. I miss our late Queen deeply. As the Foreign Office Minister at the time, I had the honour of meeting foreign leaders as they were coming to sign the condolence books. And the deep grief amongst women leaders was huge. She obviously wrapped her own arm around women leaders across the world. But I wish our new Queen all the best as she prepares for her coronation. R for rape. The rate of prosecution is on its way up, but it's still too low, so the government must keep focusing on this. The next is the abhorrent Stephen Bear, a violent, abusive, misogynistic man who has just been sent to jail for revenge pornography, and long may he stay there. And so much praise must go to the brave Georgina Harrison, who was determined to see him stand trial for what he has done. T for thank you. The late Madeleine Albright said there's a special place in hell for a woman who doesn't support other women. But I think there's a special place in heaven for men who put their own heads above the parapets to defend women's rights. I'd like to thank the Father of the House in particular for being here today. U for Ukraine and the women of Ukraine. Despite the rapes, despite the 6,000 children that have been abducted, despite the deaths of children, of partners, sons, grandparents, the women of Ukraine continue to stand so firm, so brave, and fight for their freedom. Their fight for freedom is the world's fight for freedom, and we will stand with you not only on International Women's Day, but every day as long as it takes. V for violence in politics. Online violence makes women MPs silence our voices. It puts women off standing, and too many women in the UK are facing real threats to their safety. We must stop the hate speech, and we must make it clear that violence will not be tolerated in our politics. W is for wonderful, okay? We often complain about all the challenges women have, but we often forget to say that being a woman is wonderful, and I would not have it any other way. X and Y are chromosomes, Zs are for sleeps. Thank you for listening and not for falling asleep.
Jess Phillips.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I want to pay, to start, huge tribute to Counting Dead Women and to the femicide census. The first year I read the list of killed women who had been killed by men, none of the women's names sparked a moment of recognition for anyone other than their bereaved loved ones. This year, there will be names on this list we have all heard of. Women who, following their brutal killings, have become household names. Were it not for the arduous work over a decade of Karen Ingala Smith and latterly her work with the femicide census to painfully keep this list and to fight every day for killed women to be an issue of major public concern, working alongside brilliant and crusading bereaved families, moms, dads, brothers, sisters, daughters and sons. This year, the names would be equally anonymous. These amazing campaigners have made sure that killed women are no longer just a name recorded in a local newspaper. They have made sure the issue of femicide and all the failings that lead to an increased risk are a national priority for the people of Britain. Reading this list is the honour of my life. Today we are joined by families whose loved ones' names appear on this list or who have been on previous lists. Bearing witness to them matters. So here is the list from Counting Dead Women and the femicide census of women killed, where the primary suspect or known killer is a man since this time last year. Sabita Thanwani, Yasmin Begum, Shatira Bibi, Sherry Bruce, Helen Laurie, Emma Bailey, Ramona Stoyer, Alison Nelson, Susan Ferrance, Katie Kenyon, Budug Jones, Inayat Begum, Dolet Hill, Tanisha Afari Akufa, Samantha Drummond, Diana Gabaline, Amy Cannon, Amanda Michaela, Shannon Stanley, Lorraine Cullen, Karen Wheeler, Lisa Fraser, Anaya Jerkowa, an unnamed woman, Mari O'Flynn, Julie Yowell, Antonella Castavalder, Kerry Owen, Sarah Alley, Jennifer Andrews, another unnamed woman, Margaret Una Noon, Sukandala Francis, Sally Turner, Sumaya Begum, Zara Elena, Wendy Morris, Abby Fisher, Margaret Barnes, Haina Bashir, Samantha Murphy, Madison Wright, Lauren Howe, Becky Rees-Hughes, Mari Doherty, Kathleen John, Helen Barlow, Michaela Taylor, Eleanor O'Brien, Ashley Dale, Karen Dempsey, Wendy Buckney Morgan, Lizzie McCann, Margaret Griffiths, Susan Moore, Katie Hermes Irimia, Jacqueline Forrest, Patricia Bitters, Harleen Kaur Sampreet Gandhi, Holly Thompson, Ruth Stone Houghton, Gillu Nash, Jill Barclay, Diana Dafter, Hilary Round, Angie White, Yolanda Saldana Feliz, Deborah Gumbrell, Caroline Adeyula, Keisha Kristen Dulu, Emma Potter, Alexis Karen, Claire Armstrong, Jacqueline Rutter, Lorraine Mills, Fatoumata Haidara, Ruta Draudavilati, Mary Andrews, Michelle Hanson, Maureen Gittow, Cynthia Turner, Anju Asok, Ailish Walsh, Natalie McNally, Sabrina Cooper, Stacey Warnock, Francesca Di Dio, Courtney Bourne, Elle Edwards, Stephanie Hanson, Gabriella Rudin, Beatrice Corrie, Jacqueline Kerr, Holly Newton, Anne Woodbridge, Emma Patterson, Valentina Cosma, Erica Parsons, Lorna England, Edna Berry, Daryl Buchanan, Eliza Beebe, Sarah Brealey, Sarah Albone, Sandra Giraldo, Charlotte Wilcock, Jane Collinson, and Helen Harrison, whose name had to be written on as I walked into this chamber. Every year, final name. This year, we also remember Brianna Gay, a young woman brutally killed, where a young woman and man have been charged. The youngest on the list was 15-year-old Holly Newton, and the oldest was 92-year-old Anne Woodbridge. I also want to mention Joanna Simpson, who was killed before the tradition of reading this list began. However, her killer, who spent days, if not weeks, digging her grave that he would bury her in, was found not guilty of murder, but instead of manslaughter. Her family are with us today, and I join them in their campaign to stop his release from prison just 13 years after her brutal killing. I also want to mention the women who never get named on this list. These are women who are suffering terrible domestic abuse and sexual violence, like Bianca Thomas, who fell from a tower block window following years of domestic abuse. There are many women who never make it onto this list because no one is ever charged with their killing. Yeah. I have read hundreds of inquest reports and domestic homicide reviews over the years. Everyone pushes for lessons to be learned, tells us next time it will be different. It never is. This week alone, I have spoken to a woman whose perpetrator turned up at her home while on bail for trying to attack her with a weapon A call to the police left her waiting 7 days for a response. Femicide is currently not mentioned in the domestic abuse strategy. This is not okay. I urge the government to hurry up and release the long overdue sentencing review into domestic homicide. There is no reason why we are still waiting. All these women died in the time that we have been promised this review.
My honourable friend,
I absolutely will.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way, and I thank her for reading that list. It is just as powerful every year, and every year it is a shocking indictment on our society. The list this year included my constituent Fatoumata Haidara. Can I also put on record the names of Fatoumata's 2 daughters, 3-year-old Fatima and 1-year-old Naima, who were also killed in the fire started deliberately at their home, which claimed Fatoumata's life last November.
I thank the honourable lady. Unfortunately, the list, as it currently stands, does not include the children also killed. And in lots of these cases, the famous case that, of course, we all know about in Epsom, there was a child killed in that case. There are many children who are also slain by violent men along with their mothers, and we will never, ever forget them. The families of and the Killed Women campaign who join us here today would want me to make clear that lessons are not being learned. Warm words are no longer enough. We honour these women not by reading out their names, not by doing any of the promises that happen in this place. We honour them with deeds, not with words.
Yeah. Jackie Doyle-Price.
Madam Deputy Speaker, and can I thank the Honourable Lady for the speech she's just given, and also to thank her for doing what she's just done each year, because she, by taking this step, has drawn a huge amount of attention to this issue. And we are all talking about it a lot more as a consequence. And personally, I'm grateful, and women up and down this country should be also. I'm also very pleased to see my honourable friend, the member for Charnwood, witnessing that speech and in his place. And I hope he will take this in the spirit with which it's given when I say I hope he was listening. Because we still have a culture in this country in which our criminal justice system devalues women when it comes to being victims of crime. And it's all very well, we pass these wonderful laws, don't we, in this place, about, equality. We've got the Equality Act, isn't it marvellous? Behaviourally, there is still massive prejudice and discrimination against women, and nowhere is that more clear when it comes to the murder of women. If a man murders his wife, he's treated less severely by the courts. That surely is wrong, and that's something we must absolutely tackle. And, it's so depressing that, over the recent months we have seen high-profile cases of this nature which have hit the headlines. But it's done in a very voyeuristic way. We still end up then talking about these women who have been victims of terrible violence as if it's some kind of soap opera, and that just isn't good enough. We just need to have absolute tolerance of that. Yeah.
I thank the Honourable Member for giving way in her powerful speech on this subject. Does she agree with me that the role of the media in reporting these crimes, going back to the tragic murder where essentially a number of these men are depicted as family men and something just went wrong, they should be viewed how they are, murderers?
I think the Honourable Lady makes a point very powerfully. The way the media reports these things are like soap opera, not like crime. And it's about creating a story around someone where actually there is someone who's been a victim of a hideous act of violence here. And she's quite right to describe people, to highlight the fact that, it's a family man's done this, and, they were feeling so diminished because they'd lost their job. That happens on the one hand. At the same time, we have female sex workers murdered every week of the year who don't even merit a mention. And that just illustrates the pervasiveness of the culture in this country which still treats women as objects. And it is still very much a world which runs according to men. And I'm standing here listening to myself thinking, God, what happened to you, Jackie? You know, when I was growing up in the 1980s, you know, I thought the battles of feminism were won. I never thought I'd be standing here and banging on about the rights of women. But actually, as time progresses, I just think we're going backwards. It's almost as if Parliament's passed these laws to establish equality, and that means, well, that's all right, I've done, job done. But actually, it's not done that at all. In many respects, it has gone backwards. So, you know, yeah, I don't want to be treated like a delicate little flower. But just because we now have a law that doesn't do that and establishes my rights, that's actually given a lot of men a behavioural excuse not to treat me with respect and not to recognise the fact that I do have vulnerabilities being a woman, and you know, I do have vulnerabilities. I'm quite happy to accept that. I know some of my male colleagues think that I don't, but I do. And yes, indeed.
My honourable friend for giving way, and does she agree with me that, I mean, one of the things the government's done in the last 10 years by making relationship and sex education mandatory for all school-aged children will help to start really embed in the education of all of our children in this country what a good relationship looks like. And that's going to be very pertinent when it comes to the treatment of women in the future.
I do agree with my right honourable friend, but I do have a word of caution in that, because it has to be the right materials. And I'm afraid we have a bit of a Wild West out there, because we've had all kinds of organisations bidding for government money to produce materials for this space. But I think some of the materials I've seen, certainly I would not feel appropriate to be shared with school-aged children.
Would you join me in also urging Ofsted to do a deep dive on this issue so that they can look at exactly the point that she's made? It's an issue that I've raised with government ministers and also with Ofsted Direct.
I think actually that point is a very good one, because I think in order to guarantee the quality of the schools and the content, there does need to be a degree of inspection, because we know we will find bad actors everywhere in society, and perhaps in schools we need to make sure we do that protection. Yes.
Just very briefly, I know there's lots of pressure on this time, but isn't it also important that the people who deliver these courses, the teachers in the room, have to be specialist teachers rather than leaving it to a math teacher?
I'll have less sympathy with that point, actually. I think we should all understand what standards of good behaviour are, and it should be intrinsic. Frankly, no teacher should be allowed in a classroom who doesn't understand respect. It comes down to that, ultimately, and I think they should all be equipped with that. If I could make some progress, because at the moment my speech has been entirely interventions, so if you wouldn't mind. I'm glad to see the Honourable Lady, the member for Kingston Hull, in her space, because I wanted to talk today about abortion. And, you know, I think it's very important that, you know, as we in this place here, the mother of parliaments, you know, this advanced democracy, that we really challenge ourselves about whether the laws we have here are really fit for purpose, particularly when on things like abortion we are quite good at lecturing the rest of the world about these things. And my fundamental view is that our abortion law is currently not safe. And the most important thing that we can do in this place is make sure that our laws do no harm. And you know, I've said this before in this House. The law we have regulating abortion is older than me, and frankly, it's, you know, I haven't worn too well, but that's worn even worse. It is in desperate need of reform, and I'm afraid that while ever we treat this as an issue of conscience, we are failing women, because that law predates medical abortion. It deals with a situation when the only terminations you could have were surgical, which as we all know, are more dangerous. And the law is drawn upon that basis, which is why it relies on 2 doctors having to certify that this procedure is necessary. 2 doctors now, really? When we have the availability of medical abortion? I just don't think it's necessary. You know, back in the 1990s, when Kenneth Clarke was Secretary of State for Health, so we're going back a long way, the abortion law was amended at that point to enable abortions to take place in different settings other than the licensed establishments that the state approves of. But it took until the pandemic for that to actually be made a reality. And actually, the reality it was made wasn't the one intended at the time the law was passed in the 90s. The whole idea was that it recognised that we now had medical abortion, which could be administered safely by pill. And the idea was, when Ken Clarke accepted that amendment, was that we would be able to access abortions in places like family planning clinics and places in the community, instead of the stigmatised, listed places that have to be regulated by the Secretary of State, which, by the way, has made sure that our abortions are a monopoly service played by 2 providers in the independent sector. They're very rarely done by the NHS. And actually, you know, we've discussed earlier this week the public order bill and the whole issues of protest. I mean, would there really be so much protest if abortion services were more embedded in our established National Health Service, instead of shunted away into back streets somewhere, which make them a target? Yes, indeed.
I'm grateful. It's worth remembering that an early Conservative woman Member of Parliament, Margaret Thatcher, in 1967, both voted to decriminalise male homosexual acts, and she stayed up all night to help get David Steele's abortion bill through the House of Commons. Can I put it to my honourable friend that, given that there are now over 200,000 abortions a year in this country, it takes 2 to tango, that's 400,000 people contributing, some perhaps more than once, but not many, it is so common that we ought to make it easier when people decide that having an abortion is appropriate. They can do it easily and safely without embarrassment.
That's exactly the point that I was coming to make, that my honourable friend has done. The fact of the matter is I absolutely respect why members of this House have ideological objections to abortion and why they will always vote to restrict it. But the fact is, abortion is an established right now in this country, and it is our obligation to make sure that those laws are safe, that women can access abortion as early as possible in their pregnancy. That is actually the most important thing. That is the safest thing, and that's why they do need to be much more readily available. So if I could make a point to the front bench, which I fear will fall on deaf ears because we continue to see this as an issue of conscience rather than one of safety, that this is something which really ought to be reviewed. And might I suggest to the Minister, we now have a Women's Health Ambassador in Leslie Regan. And Leslie, as a former head of the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynaecologists, is eminently qualified to undertake a review about, perhaps not to make recommendations, but just to perhaps highlight how the current abortion law isn't fit for purpose, so that we can properly review how we might make it better. And I'd also just say that the way that the established Abortion Act is not encouraging a healthy debate about this either, on both sides, I might add, because that is the starting frame of reference. So we end up in this ridiculous debate about time limits, and ultimately we just need to get away from this and think about it as a health procedure, and not in the way that, ultimately, when that Act was passed back in 1968, it was a radical measure, it was an empowering measure, it was one that advanced women's rights. But here we are more than 50 years later, and we need to take a good look at it. And I will give way to the Honourable Lady because I know she has very passionate and informed views and has done so much on this issue.
I'm very grateful to the Honourable Lady, and I'm so pleased to hear her make this speech. I think what's even more worrying is that the 67 Act is over 50 years old, but of course it's underpinned by the Offences Against the Persons Act 1861, which is a Victorian piece of legislation which says that abortion is a criminal offence. And really, until we decriminalise abortion and treat it as a healthcare matter, we really are not going to get rid of the stigma. That seems to me the thing that we need to do in this country, to decriminalise, treat it as a healthcare matter, which I think the Honourable Lady is supportive of.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. It must be treated as a healthcare matter. The point she raises there about the 1861 Act, I mean, the truth is, I looked into this when I was a minister to see how many convictions there were. And to be honest, we still need to have some kind of protection which maintains the criminality of abortion, where there could be coercion involved, And you know, again, these are issues which are again still crimes against the woman.
Grateful, and I will be very short, but decriminalisation does not mean deregulation. And of course, all the healthcare laws that apply to our clinicians and nurses and everybody else would still need to apply. So things like coercion absolutely would be regulated for and would be treated as an offence. But the underlying issue of women being criminalised in that Offences Against the Persons Act has to go.
Yeah. I think the fact that the Honourable Lady and I are having a ding-dong about this while we have to have the same outcome illustrates just how badly this current debate is taking place because of the bookends of the 1861 Act and the 1968 Act. And, you know, again, it comes back to we are all wanting better outcomes and a safe system for women, and that should be our starting point, not those two pieces of legislation. And actually, we can probably strengthen the protections for women with regard to coercion if we do look at it in that way. So, as usual, Madam Deputy Speaker, I like to use this speech to give challenge to ourselves about what we aren't getting right for women, but, you know, I haven't got till midnight on Sunday, so I'm going to have to be a bit more limited in what I'm able to tackle, but I'm pleased to be able to say what I've said about abortion today. I also want to come back to the Honourable Lady's speech when she talked about indecent exposure. And I absolutely must amplify her overall argument where, to be honest, flashing is not seen as a crime. It has been totally normalised. And I heard on the radio just this week that as many as 50% of women have been victim to this crime. And I can't emphasise enough that sexual violence is something that escalates. So the moment some things are tolerated, then that behaviour is going to only increase. And Wayne Couzens is perhaps the best example of that. And this is where I come back to, you know, passing laws that give equality, have advances for women that are meant to empower us. And I really want to talk about the whole issue of contraception because, yes, it's given women the opportunity to take control of their fertility and enjoy their sexuality and all the rest of it. But it's also generated a culture where men feel even more entitled and where girls are feeling more and more forced to actually become more sexualised beings earlier than perhaps they are ready. And this is why I feel very, very strongly that we need to keep our safe spaces.
Yeah. I'd like to just point out to my honourable friend, whom I really, really value what she's saying. She's great, saying some great things. I don't think that it is contraception which has led to many of the challenges that young women are facing today, especially more violent, dangerous sex. The contraceptive pill has been around for 70 years, but the violence that women are facing today is also linked to the pornography and other issues.
I'm sorry, but my honourable friend is clearly not understanding what I am saying at all. At all, yeah. Well, she's had no sleep. The point being that we have a culture where girls are expected to be sexualised at an earlier and earlier age. And more of this behaviour is being tolerated. You know, we have a situation, we have a growth of gangs, and we talk about boys stabbing each other. We don't talk about the sexualised sharing behaviour that happens amongst those gangs. But coming back to my real point, this is why we really need to be very jealous about guarding our safe spaces. And, you know, we've had this debate a number of times before, and again, it comes back, it's similar to the abortion debate. We end up having a debate about, on a very polarised basis about things where actually we're talking about safety. I was very concerned to read in Parliament's gender guidance that the advice given here to anyone who wants to, in regards to gender, is that people should be encouraged to use the facilities that they feel comfortable with. I then went on to read that as part of the restoration and renewal project, 70% of our toilets are going to be gender neutral, and the remaining 30% will be split evenly between males and females. So we will only have 15% of toilets under restoration renewal that are female only. And, you know, at the risk of upsetting some of my male colleagues here, actually, you know, I think some of them actually aren't very comfortable with shared gender spaces either, mainly because they don't find men's toilets very nice, and they're even more embarrassed to have to share them with women, if truth be known. It is important that women have their own spaces so that we can maintain our privacy and dignity. And again, it comes back to the point about indecent exposure. Because those of us who jealously guard the need for women to have their own toilets and their own changing facilities aren't scared of trans people, we are scared of male sexual predators. And the truth of the matter is that a male sexual predator will use every tool at his disposal to get access to his victims. And the fact is, you know, ultimately, you know, it's a behaviour none of us understand, but there are some men who think, you know, they're actually very proud of showing off their penis. God knows why, because, you know, they're not the best things to look at the best of times. But they love their penis so much, they want everyone else to see it. Well, we don't. And for that reason, I will not be apologetic in continuing to maintain my defence of making sure that we have our own facilities that men, for whatever reason, will not have access to, because we have now got to work hard to establish that proper respect. You know, while ever 50% of women are being victims of indecent exposure, we have not reached the level of respect that every woman in this country deserves to have from their male counterparts. And it is incumbent on all of us, I know we're mainly women here today in this chamber, but I also ask my male colleagues who are also here, thank you for being here, and please do your bit to make sure that we all enjoy that freedom as well. Thank you.
Hannah Bardell.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. It is a huge pleasure and privilege to speak in this debate today, and there have been some really fantastic and powerful speeches by honourable and right honourable members. And I want to firstly pay tribute to my right honourable friend from Basingstoke who opened the debate. I have fond memories of us tricking down the corridor to the former Speaker's office to advocate for baby and parental leave for members of this House and try and take this place forward. And it is right, as other members have said, that we do, as female parliamentarians, often work cross-party and across this House to make progress. It is not the Punch and Judy show that folks see on the television week in, week out. But in particular, the incredibly moving speech from my honourable friend, the member for Birmingham Yardley. It has become a tradition, a grim tradition, I think it's fair to say, that she discharges her duty every year of reading the names of women who have been killed by violent men. It's incredibly important. And Madam Deputy Speaker, one of those names is a constituent of mine, Amy Cannon. And her mother, Wendy Cannon, is here with us today in the chamber. So I want to share what happened to Amy, the details of that. And I would stress that these are Wendy's own words, and that we are privileged that she is willing to share those with us through me, her Member of Parliament. On the 5th of May last year, Wendy and her husband were enjoying a Friday night. It felt like any other typical Friday night as they began thinking about the weekend. Wendy had been communicating with their daughter Amy via WhatsApp, and Amy had been telling them how much she was looking forward to work the next day. Amy worked at a beauty salon, and she had plans to celebrate a birthday party that weekend, and she was going to help out at a charity fundraising event for a children's hospice. In spite of her own challenges, anorexia, self-harming, domestic abuse and addiction, she wanted to help others. She had a big heart. That was Amy. On Saturday, her parents became worried about Amy's lack of contact. Amy's father went to her house and he found her dead with multiple injuries. The police who attended that attack described the attack as a brutal and sustained attack. Amy would have been frightened, in pain, alone, and dying in a place that she should have felt safe in. Amy was only 26 years old, and she had so much to live for and so much to give. Amy's parents and their grandchildren's lives will never be the same again. Amy's mum Wendy told me that they stagger from day to day in a dark maze of grief, lost in a legal system which they do not understand. And they have one question: how many more women have to die before we recognise that gender violence is now becoming an epidemic in our society? I am incredibly proud of and grateful to Amy's parents for their courage and bravery in sharing Amy's story.
Hear, hear.
And for allowing me to share that with you today. When Wendy first came to see us to get support, we sat together. She told me about Amy, and we cried a lot. And Wendy said to me this morning when she came to Parliament that she'd heard the Prime Minister's comments about his concerns, his legitimate concerns about his daughter's safety walking to school. And she said that she hears that, but now imagine how she feels. The challenges that Amy faced in her life are sadly shared by many women across the UK. I've spoken before on women from my own constituency, Kirsty Maxwell and Julie Pearson, both killed abroad at the hands of violent men. It was their untimely and tragic deaths that led to my team and I to start work on deaths abroad and consular assistance. And there are so many other women that we could talk about, that have been spoken about, and that are very often missed off our lists, forgotten about, or unnamed. But we are privileged to be here and in this position as female parliamentarians. And I am in this place because of generations of women who've come before me, who've fought for our right to vote, to get paid equally, to get treated fairly, and who have fought for real progress at their own expense, both professionally and personally. In fact, I had the privilege, Mr Deputy Speaker, of taking some of the WASPy women who were here with us yesterday to the suffragette broom cupboard, a little-known shrine for those feminists amongst us. And in that broom cupboard, on the night of the census in 1911, Emily Weldon Davison hid herself so she could record her address as in that cupboard and in the chapel of St Mary Undercroft. Her census form gives the postal address as found hiding in crypt of Westminster Hall. The penciled note at the bottom left gives the date 3rd, 4th, 11, since Saturday. Emily was arrested on 9 occasions. She went on hunger strikes 7 times and was force-fed on 49 occasions. She died after being hit by King George V's horse at the 1930 Derby when she walked onto the track during the race, sacrificing herself so that we can be here today. Mr Deputy Speaker, there was something almost prophetic about showing those incredible women who faced such injustice that place where another great woman suffered and sacrificed to make her point. Be happy to.
Emily Davison did teach for a time in Worthing, which gives me a constituency link. I think actually her view was that if she couldn't vote, she wasn't a person and therefore she shouldn't be in the census. I don't think she actually aimed to be recorded in Westminster, she just wanted to hide here.
I thank the right honourable gentleman for that intervention and that education. That's incredibly helpful. One of the WASPy women commented to me as we walked past the statue of Falkland, whom suffragette and activist Marjorie Hume chained herself to, that they should have brought their own chains. It is a brutal and harsh reality that more than a century on, we have women facing similar injustice who have to fight way past retirement age and who are dying before they get justice that they are entitled to. And I am reminded also, Mr Deputy Speaker, that it's Endometriosis Awareness and Action Month. And as the co-chair with my honourable friend, the member for Kingston upon Hull, we've been to a number of events and briefings this week, as we do across the year, to talk about, discuss and campaign for better diagnosis, support and funding for research and treatment for those who suffer with such a brutal and life-limiting disease.
Well, my honourable friend,
I'll be happy to give way.
I'm very grateful to her for giving way, and she makes an important point about a reality that blights the lives of many women today. I wonder if she would also call for the same research and the same focus to be shone upon polycystic ovary syndrome, another blight upon the lives of many women.
I thank my honourable friend, and I absolutely and wholeheartedly agree with her. So often women are being left behind by the lack of resource, the lack of research and the lack of understanding of diseases such as endometriosis and polycystic ovary syndrome. And all over the UK we have incredible groups like my local one in Livingston, the Endo Warriors, run and managed by Candice Sinclair, two utterly remarkable women. And I was reminded yesterday that unlike other diseases, endometriosis and also, I believe, polycystic ovary syndrome still has some of the worst support and understanding by clinicians.
Hear, hear.
And the post-op care comes nowhere close to what you get if you have almost any other injury, disorder or disease. And I also want to mention briefly Mary Lyon, who heads up the Primados campaign, another scandal of her time. And I know that the Minister opposite will be familiar with this. And we have to pay tribute to those women and those parents who have suffered at the hands of Primados, the hormone pregnancy drug, because they are still fighting for justice decades on from the harm that has been done to them and their children. Some progress has been made, though, Mr Deputy Speaker. It's not all grim. In Scotland, for example, we have become the first country in the UK to publish the Women's Health Plan, an important first step, and I know that the UK Government is following in our footsteps. But in terms of the rights of women and girls in the UK Government's international development strategy, that's incredibly welcome. But what is not welcome is the cut in international aid. That is going to hit some of the poorest areas in the world the most, and we need to see that reversed. And the simple fact is that women today still face vast inequalities. Their issues are complex and interlinked, whether that's childcare costs, cost of living, access to affordable healthcare, and traditional stereotypes, of many which we have heard from members across the Chamber. Women of colour, trans women and those in lower incomes and those women across the LGBT community continue to be disproportionately impacted. If you are a refugee or asylum seeker, not only is this UK Government bringing forward illegal and illiberal policies that will shame us the world over, but the no recourse to public funds has a brutal impact on many women who are seeking refuge and asylum. I've seen it firsthand with my own constituents who have come to me. And according to the World Economic Forum's Global Gender Gap Report 2022, it will take another 132 years to close the gender pay gap. Internationally, we see women striving for the same rights as men. In Iran, we have to pay tribute to those incredible women who have stood up and risen up against an authoritarian government. To women in Afghanistan who are just fighting for the right to retain the ability to be educated and are facing a brutal reality following troops leaving. The West has left the women of Afghanistan behind, and we must look at what more we can do. And for the women in Ukraine, constituents of mine like Natalia, who's come to intern in my constituency office, she has had to leave many of her family members behind who are there, who are fighting and who are still caught up in that horrific conflict. There are many women in all of our lives who are incredibly important. Mr Deputy Speaker, one of those is my mum. She stood for election to this place in 2010. She was unsuccessful, but 5 years later, I'm pleased to tell you that I was able to beat the man that had beaten her.
Go, Hannah.
I grew up as a child of a single parent. I was born out of wedlock. And I just want to say to all the single parents and the single mothers how incredible you are, that you are loved and you are wanted and you are valued.
Hear, hear.
And one of my favourite stories about my mum was about a dinner tradition that we had, one of our favourite dinners that we had that was called, and some may be familiar with this and some may not, a pick and mix dinner. And that pick and mix dinner often came at the end of the month. And it wasn't something that dawned on me until adulthood, that this was a dinner made up creatively by my mum with whatever was left over at the end of the month, because quite often there wasn't much left in the tank to spend. Her creativity in presenting us with lots of different wee bits as an entertaining game worked every time. We loved it, and I still love it. My mother's door was always open to anyone, no matter how little we had. Christmases with folk who didn't have anywhere to go, camping trips with other folks' kids. Mothers, especially single mothers, are something really quite exceptional in my personal view. And before I close, Mr Deputy Speaker, I want to pay tribute to the incredible Emma Rich. She was the Executive Director of Engender.
Hear, hear.
And she passed away suddenly in 2021. She is desperately missed by her family, friends and colleagues, and I was the beneficiary of her excellent advice on more than one occasion. I am so pleased that the Emma Rich Law Clinic will open shortly at the University of Glasgow in her memory. So, Mr Deputy Speaker, to all of the incredible women, to those who identify as women, and to women like Amy, who, in spite of all of the challenges she faced, displayed an enormous kindness and generosity for others, we salute you. I know that my constituent Wendy will continue to fight for women's equality in Amy's memory with her army of friends and family, and I look forward to going on that journey with them. Hear, hear.
Flick Drummond.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker, and it is a pleasure to speak again in this debate on International Women's Day. Embrace equity is the hashtag this year, and whereas we're getting to equality of resources and opportunities, equity recognises that each person has different circumstances, and we may need to allocate different resources and opportunities to reach an equal outcome. So I thought I would use this debate to highlight the work being undertaken to promote tech and STEM careers to women and girls, one of the themes of the 2023 International Women's Day. Careers in STEM is something we keep returning to because we're not still maximising the potential of women in these industries, even if there is equality in provision and training. It has not been accessed equally, so we need to examine why. I have several interests in this, chiefly through the Women and Work APPG. I co-chair with my honourable friend for Birmingham Yardley, who has just left this chamber. But it's also true that we do work together across the House in many ways, as has been mentioned earlier. But also my interest comes from my work in university technical colleges, an education model offering transformational opportunities to young people. And finally, my interest, like many others, lies as a mother and a grandmother now. Thank you. Yes, I have 3 grandchildren. I have been a strong supporter of UTCs since they were first introduced, and I was instrumental in encouraging the establishment of my local UTC in Portsmouth. Every young person interested in a STEM career should have the same chance to have an education that a UTC provides. Yeah. This should include coding within the core curriculum in every school. But most UTCs are now oversubscribed, sometimes 10 applicants for every place. So I'm backing the Portsmouth UTC to launch another one in the Solent region, as it will help many of my young constituents access an amazing route into STEM careers. Last week, I visited the London Design and Engineering UTC. Girls make up 36% of the intake, and that's fairly typical of most UTCs overall, and 51% of teachers in UTCs are women. I hope that number increases to nearer 50% quickly. Applicants for next year are 50% female, so there is some progress at last. Absolutely.
The figures that the Honourable Lady is citing there are really, really interesting and obviously a great empirical example. But I wonder if she has any thoughts on how we might have achieved 50% of the tuition or tutors being female, but, dare I say, only a third of the students being so. What's the difference between those two numbers, in her opinion?
Well, quite interesting. I think there's 65% of secondary schools have women as teachers, so it's slightly less in proportion. But having met the female teachers in the UTCs, they're all incredibly highly skilled scientists and mathematicians, like my honourable friend for Chelmsford here, and also my honourable friend for North Devon is also a mathematician, so we have them in here as well. But it's a shame because we're sort of putting them in here and not actually out in the community where they could be teaching the next generation. A third of UTC female graduates go on to STEM destinations. Some 70% of girls go on to higher education compared to 55% of boys, and 24% of girls went on to apprenticeships, mostly at level 4 or higher, against just 4% nationally in other schools. But the fact that only a third go on to STEM destinations should raise alarms, though. This year, the Women and Work APPG published our report on the cost of women in work. We had a lot of input from the tech industries and some shocking statistics about women in tech. In 2017, PwC discovered that only 3% of women said tech would be their first choice. This is shockingly low considering the good salaries and prestige that comes with the industry. The top 5 most valuable brands are tech companies: Apple, Google, Microsoft, Amazon and Meta, for example. 78% of students could not name a woman working in technology. And probably that's not surprising, because since there are only 26% of women, 26% in the tech workforce are women. The tech industry has produced awe-inspiring, life-improving inventions, but it's also contributed to a growing online misogyny and gadget misuse, including spy cameras and stalking. But surely having more women working in the industry would help lead to tech being better adapted to women and more work to combat the negative aspects for women.
Will she give way?
Absolutely.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. I'm sure she would be interested to know that the theme of this year's CSW meeting at the UN was women and the impact of technology, and I know that she had wished to be there herself, but that this issue of trying to make sure that technology works for women was absolutely key and a highlight of the global conversation. And the point about needing to have more women in the tech sector working on developing new technologies was reiterated again and again across the world. So what she's saying is absolutely spot on.
Yeah, and also the impact on education in perhaps more remote countries, even in Afghanistan. We would hope that people can actually access education through tech. So if we can get more women working in tech, we could then provide education which maybe even the Taliban would agree with.
She's been very generous with her time. May I say, first of all, how much I agree with her last point there on Afghanistan. And indeed, I was hearing some particularly powerful anecdotes from Street Child charity only in a meeting last night on that point. But the question I wondered if I might just probe on is whether her APPG and whether others that she is working with have broader thoughts here on the future of work and whether there is an avenue here to have a wider debate about women's interests in that. Not that I believe that there is any such thing as a woman's interest in a ghettoised form, but I wonder what her thoughts are on that.
Absolutely. I set up the APBG in 2015 with that sole purpose that we would change policy towards the barriers to women in work. And we have, over each year, produced a report which my honourable friend I will pass some copies to, because we cover the whole gamut of women in the workplace. And this year we have been focusing on tech, which is why today's debate is so important. We do need to change the way that we use the internet, and having more women at the top will help, because we need to be more inclusive, and as we've just said, that will help in education around the world too. But careers advice must push tech as an option. Tech companies must link in with schools and provide mentoring, and it will take time, commitment and long-term investment, but it will make a massive difference to our productivity. There are mentoring programs for women already in the tech industry, and they're proving successful. Cornell University has estimated it could lead to a 15 to 38% increase in promotion and retention rates for women, because, as I've said, there are very few women at the top of tech companies. So it is good to have a day when we can focus on how far women have got in so many areas, but we've also heard some very harrowing speeches today as well, and so it's great that we can encompass every single aspect of what it's like to be a woman. Tech must reduce its barriers to women, to use it effectively and to enter it as a career, and then we can really embrace equity. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. Mr. Deputy Speaker, when I was a teenager, I used to question why there are so many ways to tell the relationship status of a woman, Mrs., Miss, Ms., but there's just a Mr. And I'm still wondering that as a grown woman. And in articles, there's always the age of the woman after her name, but only sometimes the age of the man. Yep. Why is that? Yes. Our laws and our language are designed to keep women vulnerable and exposed in a particular kind of way.
Well, she gives way on that point.
I will.
I thank her for giving way. I was a secondary school teacher, and although a married woman of 4 children in my middle age, a man was always a sir, I was Miss. Isn't that bizarre?
Yeah. It completely is. And again, it's about language and what it is designed for and to do. And if we take, for instance...
She brings up the really interesting issue of inequality in titles. I was very fortunate indeed to be able to receive a damehood recently, and I'm greatly honoured to have that. But I note with interest that those of my colleagues who've been knighted, their spouses have a different title entitlement to my husband. Would you agree that perhaps her point about titles needs to be looked at on both sides of the coin, for men and women?
Yeah. Absolutely. When we talk about equality, equity, not only in actions but in language as well, it all needs to be looked at because there's certain systems or structures are designed in a certain way. And as I said, to keep women exposed and vulnerable. If you take sex workers, for instance, working alone is okay, but working in pairs is illegal. How on earth does that keep women safe? And just this week, there was, during the debate on buffer zones around abortion clinics, there were lots and lots, many men telling women how they should think, what they should do, who should they listen to about their bodies. I mean, our structures are riddled with misogyny, racism, and so much else. And it's time, Mr. Deputy Speaker, that we change how women are written about. And I've campaigned for many things in this House, from domestic abuse policy, trying to allow 10 days paid leave for when people leave abusive relationships, particularly women, because in those 10 days, it could save a life, because that's when they're most vulnerable. You are not safe when you leave an abusive relationship. You become more vulnerable. I've campaigned for changes in the use of language by the Met Police, for instance, when they deliver briefings and press releases for missing and murdered women. And I've also campaigned for changes in the judiciary that's filled with many, please don't take offence, Mr. Deputy Speaker, but it's filled with many old white men with outdated views. And I need to recognise the work of Judge Anuja KC, first person of colour to become an Old Bailey judge. And today, and she's doing her very best to try and change how the judicial system works, but she's just one woman, powerful as she is. And today I'm campaigning and championing the work of Level Up and calling for a clause in the IPSO Editor's Code for reporting fatal domestic abuse. It needs to be a code that journalists are legally bound to, not a voluntary code, and I tell the House why. The way press reports domestic abuse is often inaccurate, undignified, and prioritises, sensationalises headlines over responsible reporting. There's always and often this negative framing of victims, and when it goes viral, it is amplified over and over again, and that is extremely damaging because it reinforces negative framing around the victim and what is seen as acceptable or deserving behaviour of often the woman who is killed. Sexism, misogyny, extremism or terrorism never used when describing violent men. Why not? We have an epidemic in our country of domestic violence, domestic abuse and violence against women and girls. Level Up, the organisation, introduced the UK's first guidelines, and the BBC, Mirror, The Guardian, Metro have all taken this on board, but more needs to be done. The recent coverage of Nicola Bulley, Emma Patterson and Brianna Gay shows us that the media reporting of women who are violently abused or killed or have died is out of control. Emma Patterson, who was killed along with her young daughter by her violent husband, was reported like this. Did living in the shadow of this high-achieving wife lead to the unthinkable tragedy? It goes on. Husband of Epsom College head who killed her and their daughter before turning the gun on himself was desperate to do more with his days after his business failed. Why on earth would we accept a media reporting the murder of a woman and a young child in that way in our country? It's unacceptable. And in this House, we should be able to legislate against that. And that is why we need new enforceable editors' code. It's not an isolated incident. When a woman is killed every 3 days by a man, and member for Birmingham Yardley read out the names today, and that list never gets shorter. It's an epidemic. And it's...
I'd like to thank the Honourable Member for giving way. And I'd just like to draw her attention, because I agree it mustn't become an epidemic, to draw her attention to some of the work that's been done in Essex under our Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner and the Chief of Police, particularly to intervene with perpetrators. They run a thing called the Change Hub, which is working with perpetrators, which has actually resulted in a 95% reduction in violent incidents by those perpetrators. And a campaign that encouraged people to self-refer led to over 115 people referring themselves as perpetrators and then working with them. So can I encourage her maybe to look at the work from Essex and see if she could get that into her own police area, where this work with perpetrators seems to be helping to reduce domestic violence?
The member, it is an epidemic. It's not becoming an epidemic. It is an epidemic when a woman is killed every 3 days by a man. It is an epidemic, and we need to start. I need to finish my point. We need to start referring to it as such. But yes, there are some good work and practices happening, like IDVAs in some police forces, but it's still not working because there's still a woman killed every 3 days. So yes, we can acknowledge the good work, but I'm not here today to acknowledge good work. I'm here today to push for changing legislation so that we can save lives. Violence against women and girls and who are victims of abuse is they're never responsible for the abuse, and we need to start at that point. It is the perpetrator, and media reporting must reflect that it is the perpetrator. I'm going to read out a few more headlines. Husband jailed after he snapped and smothered nagging wife to death.
Nagging wife.
Henpecked husband killed wife. Wife jibes about penis size drove hubby to murder. Government fake. I mean, it is shocking that these are actual headlines. There'll be people listening today and say, well, Dawn's not telling the truth. That can't be true. She's lying. I'm not lying. These are actual headlines. And I have to say that, and the member from Thurrock on the other side talked about the culture and language, and I must say that this fake culture war that we have going on at the moment is extremely, extremely damaging to women and to other minoritized groups in our society. Because we have seen where people say, well, why can't I say what I want to say? Why can't I do what I want to do? All of this language is actually having damaging effect, and that's why we won't make progress.
I think she's making some really important points about the way that language in the public discourse and often in the media is both dehumanising, I think, to the women whose headlines she has read out and describing them in the most ridiculous of fashions, considering the context. But I think that more broadly, the language of media is often very objectifying of women as well. So I think on all of these fronts, it would be really helpful if one of the takeaways from today were that some of the people who are listening to this might think about that and perhaps change some of the way that they describe women.
Hear, hear.
I agree with my honourable friend. And often you find when a woman's been killed or murdered, they'll try and find a picture of her in a nightclub or holding a drink or with her hair down or with a short skirt on or dress on. Like, that is a reason for her to be murdered or killed. The misogyny that exists in our structures must be rooted out. And, I don't just talk, Mr. Deputy Speaker. I've worked hard with the House of Commons complaints procedure to change how this place works and operates. And I'm working with the police because Wayne Couzens, for example, and the messages from the WhatsApp groups proves exactly what black people have been saying for a really long time, that structures built on the promotion of a certain type of white man is riddled with racism, misogyny, homophobia, and everything else that tries to belittle others. It's an uncomfortable truth, but it's a truth that has to be aired. When our police forces, jurors and judges are drawn from society that allows outdated, damaging portrayals of domestic violence, the damage is clear. There's still one woman killed every 3 days by a man. So it is time, Mr. Deputy Speaker, for this long overdue change if we're going to reduce the number of women killed every year. I recognise that there are some work that's being done, and I recognise there's some work being done with the Met Police, but it's not enough. I mean, I thought about whether I should read this out in the House, but I am going to just read out a couple of WhatsApp messages, the police discussion about domestic violence. The police said that the women that suffer from domestic violence have one thing in common: they're women who don't listen. They joke on the Wayne cousin and another police officer joked when they saw a young drunk woman on the train. Did you finger her to see if she was okay? And he responded, another police officer responded, I considered it, but she was a right old lump, so I just raped a bystander instead. Mr. Deputy Speaker, there's more of that on the police WhatsApp groups. There's absolutely appalling and disgusting. And I just think that it is time for us to legislate and recognise that words have consequences. And with the rise of domestic terrorists in our countries, groups like the growth of incels, we have about nearly 3,000 incels in our country, and they're very much underground, and it's very concerning, where teachers have been asked in the classroom, Miss, have you ever been raped? These are the kind of language, and they talk about how they can watch women being murdered. This is really damaging, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And I want to end on this. And there's some well-known sayings. And there's one that says, a world that does not love, respect and protect its women is doomed to perish because women are Mother Earth. And G.D. Anderson said, feminism isn't about making women stronger. Women are already strong.
Exactly.
It's about changing the way the world perceives that strength. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Anna.
Very much, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It's a true privilege to speak in today's debate because this time last year I couldn't take part because I hadn't yet made my maiden speech. And it's a particular pleasure to follow the Honourable Member for Brent Central, who's made a fascinating speech. And I really want to commend the Honourable Member for Birmingham Yardley, who's not in her place at the moment, because nobody in this place, particularly someone listening to it live for the first time, can fail to be moved by that contribution. And I believe it's incumbent on us all to try to eliminate violence against women. And I look forward to the day that we can come to this chamber and have this debate, and the Honourable Lady does not need to read out that harrowing list. I want to start with 3 words: women, life, freedom, which I know a lot of people in this chamber will know are, of course, the strapline for the recent uprising in Iran. Because yesterday was the first International Women's Day since the brutal killing of Mahsa Amini, whose murder by the medieval regime was a lightning flash around the world and has now become such a symbol of bravery, courage and hope. Because the women of Iran have been victims now of systematic oppression for the last 44 years. And it's not just religious dress codes. They're banned from singing in places, they're banned from taking part in certain sports, they're even banned from attending certain games in stadiums. In short, they are treated as second-class citizens. But as we all know, it's become far, far worse
than that in the last 175 days that there have been since the recent uprising. Following on from Mahsa Amini, there have been 82 Iranian women now murdered by the regime. And the IRGC disproportionately has been targeting women, targeting their eyes, targeting their chest, and targeting their genitals. And only this week we heard the horrifying reports of several schoolgirls being poisoned as revenge for their role in these recent protests. And I mention all of this because all that it takes for evil to prevail is for good men and women to stay silent. And I'm proud that in this place we are not staying silent about what is going on in Iran. And it's a really salutary lesson that if I was to stand up, if any of us were to stand up and say these things in Iran, we would be in mortal danger. And I have two young women who encourage me to go and protest and join these protests. And I think every time how lucky they are, how lucky we all are that we can do this. We can stand up for women. And if we could not do any of this if we were currently living in Iran. And I think it's vital we keep sending this message to the Iranian women that we stand with them, that this murderous regime has to go and the eyes of the world are on them.
Will my honourable friend give way?
Of course I will give way.
Can I thank my honourable friend for giving way? And she's making a very powerful point. And it was a point that was made to me endlessly over the last 3 days in New York at the UN Commission on the Status for Women, that actually the women who were there from Iran, from Afghanistan, from Ukraine, really need to hear vocal support from colleagues in parliaments like our own, but also at events like UNCSW, and would you agree with me that when it comes to the agreed conclusions of that event, we need to be reflecting just the point that she's made, that the plight of these women cannot be forgotten?
I absolutely agree with the point that my honourable friend is making, and it's so encouraging to know that these points have been reiterated in one of the highest conventions on the status of women, and it's also extremely good to know that finally Iran has been taken off that committee for women. A regime like this has no place on any committee that is concerned with women's rights anywhere in the entire world, and I thank her for reminding us of that. But we're so lucky that we can stand for public office. And of course, I'm privileged to have been elected as the first female MP for Southend West, but not the first MP for Southend, because of course Lady Ivor represented the seat of Southend between 1927 and 1935. So I have a proud tradition behind me. But we have so much further to go, as we all know. Just 31% of MPs are women. Since 1918, over 100 years ago, only 561 women, not even an entire parliament, have yet been elected. So if there are any women here thinking of coming into public office, particularly if they are in Southend West, I want to hear from you, and I'd be delighted to speak to you. But I am delighted, Mr Deputy Speaker, that in Southend West we do have plenty of women putting themselves forward for election in May of this year. And I want to wish the very best of luck to Councillor Meg Davison, to Councillor Leslie Salter, and we hope soon to be Councillor Cheryl Gardner. And I will be on the streets of Southend knocking on doors to support them, supported by the indefatigable Deputy Chairman Judith Suttling, who is still pounding the streets in her 80s and setting me a very daunting and energetic example. I'm going to use this time that I have to celebrate the incredible work that women in my community in Southend West do. I'm soon to launch a new Community Champions scheme in Southend alongside our local paper, the Southend Echo, to highlight heroes, unsung heroes and hidden heroes. But the first one is not unsung or hidden. She is going to be none other than our one and only Jill Allen King, OBE, who has spent her life standing up for people living with blindness and visual impairments. Jill, for those who don't know her story, lost her sight on her wedding day, aged just 24. And instead of collapsing in a sort of a well of despair, she's got out there and spent her entire life bringing things to our community, which we now take for granted. The tactile paving, the little bumps in the on the pavement, and which we all now see whenever you cross a road, that's down to Jill Allen King. The buttons at wheelchair level in buses is down to Jill Allen King. And of course she's done lots to get access into public spaces for therapy dogs. She has attracted the attention of well-known names, Paul O'Grady and Michael Ball, and of course she's got the OBE. But this year she has the Lifetime Achievement Award at the Pride of Britain's Awards, and despite her blindness, was busy teaching Ashley Banjo from Diversity to do the cha-cha-cha. But there was... of course I'll give way.
Just to demonstrate I've been around for a time, in 1986, when I became the Junior Transport Minister responsible for mobility for disabled people, it was Jill Allen King who took me for a walk around Westminster, and she helped put in the first tactile surfaces just outside the Palace of Westminster and gave much other good advice. Please give her my best wishes.
I thank my honourable friend for intervening and making that point, and I will absolutely be passing that on. Now, there are so many wonderful women in Southend West that I would like to celebrate, so in great Sir David fashion, I am now going to rattle through a whole list. So first of all, the incredible Riz Awan at the Southend Citizens Advice, who's a support for so many people across our community. She took over as Chief Executive as the COVID pandemic was starting and kept the centre open to assist people during what was one of the most difficult of times. Also at our Southend Citizens Advice, we have award-winning Emily Coombs, recognised as a rising star by the Young Energy Professionals. I would also like to pay tribute to Jackie Mullen, who is CEO of the Special Educational Needs Trust in Southend. Jackie set up this amazing organisation which supports people with learning difficulties throughout our local community, and she is a huge inspiration. I'd also like to mention my constituent Rachel, who came up to see me in this place only a few weeks ago and has led an amazing battle to raise awareness of functional neurological disorder. We also have great role models across our schools in Southend, with 13 of our head teachers being women, showing that women, of course, can take on these positions of responsibility and leadership.
Will she give way?
Of course I will give way.
I'd like to thank my honourable friend for giving way, and as a fellow Essex MP, we should also give a shout-out, or let me give a shout-out, to our Deputy Police, Fire and Crime Commissioner, Jane Gardner, especially for the work that she's doing on the Southend, Essex and Thurrock Domestic Abuse Board, which is commissioning fantastic work for charities like Compass, Changing Pathways and Next Chapter, supporting victims of domestic abuse, is at that, running all that perpetrator work that I mentioned earlier, and commissioning a network of independent domestic abuse advisors and independent sexual abuse advisors that work with victims. And all of this work, run by Jane and her team, is what is helping to get those numbers down so that fewer women are having to suffer from this awful abuse.
Thank you very much. I welcome that intervention from my honourable friend, and I'm glad that we have also got Jane on the record. Now, I'd next like to pay tribute to Denise Rossiter, the excellent chair of Essex Chamber of Commerce. Denise is an absolute force. The consummate professional, champions Essex wherever she goes, and she's a great support to female MPs in Essex. I must also mention Carla Creasy, who works tirelessly to raise awareness of endometriosis and whose event this week to launch Endometriosis Month I was delighted to host here in this place. Last week, I was privileged to attend the Jubilee Awards at Southend Civic Centre, where we celebrated women who've made a huge difference during the Jubilee year and beyond. Shirley Massey, is the president of the Leigh-on-Sea branch of the Royal British Legion. Kim Bones is a member of the Royal British Legion, and both are always there, year after year, doing their bit for our veterans. Ilda Straffer, who runs Welcome to UK, has given advice and support, help and sanctuary to all of our wonderful Ukrainian families who've come to Southend. Daniel Carbot, a real champion for our local environment, setting up the brilliant Litterless Lee initiative. And I must mention Danielle B., the organiser of the Blue Tits Cold Water Chill Swimming Group. Think about it. And she's taken me out on one of these dips, and I can tell you it's an aptly named group. Brenda Knapp was nominated by staff and children because she comes into Lee North Street School voluntarily almost every day of the week, and staff and students at the school recognise that they just simply couldn't do without her. We have a female CEO of our Lee Town Council, Helen Simmons, doing a great job. We have the female CEO of the Lady McCadden Trust, which does so much to raise awareness of breast cancer. Karen Packer gives up her own time tirelessly to volunteer, to give opportunities to guides and scouts. She is an incredible woman. During Parliament Week, I went to visit her brownie group, and we had the challenge of building a House of Parliament made out of biscuits and using icing sugar as glue. It was quite a messy experience. Finally, I must mention my incredible constituency assistant, Julie Cushion, who has won this year the Parliament People's Award as for Constituency Assistant of the Year. Her contribution to the community, quite apart from helping me, makes me feel exhausted just to think about it. She's the chair of our Mayor's Charity, raising hundreds, if not thousands, every year. She's the chair of an SEN Academy Trust. She's the director of 2 choirs. She's a trustee of the YMCA, and of course the amazing, world-winning, award-winning Music Man project. Quite apart from that, she helps me almost every day of the week in one respect or another, and I've paid tribute to her hard work in keeping me on the road. And finally, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I could not miss out on the opportunity once again to celebrate my own incredible inspiration, my own mother, Dr. Margaret Garrett. She's been a huge support to me throughout my life and is now pretty much in sole care of my lovely dog Lottie while I am up here during the week. So to her, I just say one thing. Thank you.
Florence Eshelin.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and it's an honour to follow the member for South West. And I think for a number of us, we do hold dear our mothers. I think of my late mother, who wasn't fortunate enough to see me elected to this place, but I know that she's with me every day, and she was my biggest inspiration. And just to echo the words of the member for Livingston, who's not here, my mother was also a single mother, and the role that single mothers play up and down the country, especially during this difficult time where a number of those single mothers are navigating the cost of living but still providing for their children. You know, we have to continue to pay tribute to those single mothers up and down the country. I also wanted to start, Mr. Deputy Speaker, before I go into my speech, just to pay tribute to... There are so many fantastic young women in my Vauxhall constituency, but there was one young woman that I want to pay special tribute to this afternoon. Ebenita Iyere, who's the founder of Milk and Honey Bees, which is a creative space for young black women in South London. Herself and a number of girls wrote a book earlier last year, Girlhood Unfiltered, and it's a safe space for young black girls to talk about some of the issues and challenges that they face, and the work that Ebenita has done over the last few years in providing a voice and a space for those young black girls is so inspirational, and I just wanted to make sure that she was mentioned this afternoon. Mr. Deputy Speaker, it's a real pleasure to speak in this debate today and to follow so many inspirational other women and their powerful contributions. And for me, as the MP for Vauxhall, I'm proud to represent the Brixton community that I've lived in all my life. But I'm not alone in that. Brixton is in a unique position where it is currently represented by not one, not two, but 3 MPs in this House. And I'm proud that since the 2019 election, all 3 of us are women. And locally, Lambeth Council is led by Councillor Claire Holland, Marina Ahmed AM, my successor as the London Assembly member for Lambeth and Southwark, and 30 female Lambeth councillors who provide strong leadership across our borough. And I'm really delighted that any young girl or woman growing up in Vauxhall today has so many women to look up to, not just in politics, but in our local businesses, our schools, our voluntary and community organisations, our wonderful cultural centres, and our fantastic Oval Invincibles cricket team, who, Mr Deputy Speaker, have just won the both 100 titles on offer since it was launched in 2021. Now, Mr Deputy Speaker, we should be proud of the progress we have made. We know that representation must be used to improve the rights of women and girls locally, nationally and globally. And International Women's Day is not, therefore, just a celebration of our achievements, but a chance for us to recognise how far we must still go to achieve global gender equality. One of the areas where we still see this marked disparity is between men and women's health outcomes. We know that women don't often get the treatment they need as quickly, and this problem is driven by the lack of awareness about women's health and the cultural tendency to view illness through the lens of a man. As the co-chair of the all-party parliamentary group on HIV and AIDS, I wish to focus the rest of my remarks on the impact of the HIV on women. Women make up a third of people living with HIV, and an estimated 31,000 women living in the UK and 20 million women worldwide. In 2021, 556 women were newly diagnosed with HIV for the first time in England, accounting for 27% of all new first-time diagnoses. The vast majority of these cases were likely due to exposure during heterosexual contact. I think what's most shocking is that black African women accounted for 38% of all women diagnosed, followed by white women accounting for 15%. Of the women diagnosed in 2021, this was a really shocking statistic, Mr Deputy Speaker. 35% of them lived in London. And 47% of those women were diagnosed for the first time because they were diagnosed late. And this is a key issue that's highlighted by so many organisations and charities leading the fight against HIV and AIDS. Mr Deputy Speaker, last month we celebrated HIV Testing Week, and I was proud to join other parliamentary colleagues across this House to demonstrate how quickly and easy it is to get tested. But testing is only one tool in the prevention against HIV and AIDS. And I'd also like to put on record the fantastic, formidable women who are leading the fight in the UK against HIV and AIDS. Susan Cole, Deborah Gold, Lisa Power, Sophie Strachan, Angelina Namibia, Amanda Eli, Professor Yvonne Gillies, Dr Claire Dewsnap, Professor Jane Anderson, Annie Aslett, Dr Laura Walters. These are just some of the women that I've met in my role as the co-chair of the APPG HIV and AIDS, who are taking that fight to make sure we remember women's voices if we are really to look at how we deliver services and make sure that we end new HIV transmissions by 2030. We must have a strategy for tackling persistent health issues that remain. The stigma, poverty, gender-based violence, immigration problems all intersect. The result is that women living with HIV struggle with not only their physical health, but their emotional well-being. To tackle this, we must achieve gender parity in the HIV response. This involves ensuring equitable investment, priority and attention to women in HIV prevention, research, data and services. We must also ensure that HIV research addresses specific knowledge gaps around HIV and women. This will support the full participation and meaningful involvement of women. And finally, Mr Deputy Speaker, we must follow and allow for better access to PrEP and other forms of HIV prevention. So on this International Women's Day, I say to the House that together we can end this pandemic that started...
Give way.
I'll give way on that.
Just before she finishes her very powerful speech about the importance of listening to women's voices in relation to HIV and AIDS, but does she think that we also need to listen to women's voices in a whole range of healthcare settings? I'm thinking particularly of women harmed by failures
in healthcare, including my constituent Sarah Hawkins, whose daughter Harriet was born dead as a result of inadequate maternity care, and her second daughter Lottie, who's growing up without her big sister. I'm also thinking of my constituent Peggy Gedling, who yesterday laid to rest her son Justin, far too young. His life was cut short after she was prescribed the hormone pregnancy test drug Primados. If women had been listened to, we could have avoided some of that harm. Does she agree?
I thank my honourable friend for making that powerful intervention. It's so important. When we look at the health disparities, it's really important women's voices are there in terms of the treatment they're receiving. I think all of us as MPs have received emails from female constituents detailing where they haven't been listened to, where they haven't been believed, where sometimes their symptoms have been unrecognised, been told that, you know, they need more painkillers and it will be okay, dear. Making sure that those doctors and nurses, dedicated doctors and nurses, do listen to women and believe women when they are raising medical concerns.
Absolutely.
I'll give way to my friend.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way and your very powerful speech today. Just on the subject of women and NHS and medical interventions, does my honourable friend agree with me that the structure such as body mass index, which was created to identify the average body of a man, doesn't relate to women, and we have to look at all the systematic structural misogyny that exists in our systems?
Now, I thank my honourable friend for making that really important point. I think, again, just in terms of how we identify some of the problems that women are facing, one of the other issues that I know that we've worked on together is around looking at maternal health debt within black women. The fact that if you're a black mother, you're more likely to die during childbirth or pregnancy. And some of the issues around their weight and long-term conditions not being taken into account in dealing and addressing the health inequalities that women are facing. So, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I say on this International Women's Day, there is a lot more that we can and should be doing. We should be working together to improve the quality of life for millions of women, not just in the UK, but right across the world. And it is incumbent on all of us to work together to say that we can bring the epidemic that started 40 years ago to an end by including women's voices around that. Thank you.
Elizabeth.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. International Women's Day is a time to celebrate, and there is much to celebrate about being a woman in 2023. I always think at this time of my friends, many now spread across the country and indeed some spread across the world, which I've spent this time with in the past, but too busy with children, grandchildren, older parents, their own jobs to kind of get together. But I know that they're always there for me. I know they're really proud of me being here, and I know that I would never have made it here without them. And this weekend, I'm looking forward to joining Bristol Women's Voice for a fantastic programme of events, and particularly discussing social care and the role it could play in the Bristol economy if only it was done better. Chaired by my friend Diane Bunyan, who was Bristol's first Labour leader of the council only about 20 years ago. And although Bristol has a long radical history and many women have been at the forefront, I think of Dorothy Hodgkin, who was Chancellor of University of Bristol. Elizabeth Blackwell was the first woman to qualify as a medical doctor. Jessie Stevens, trade union Mary Carpenter, Hannah Moore, women involved in social programmes. And Lady Apsley was Bristol's first woman Member of Parliament, Conservative Member of Parliament, who, after the death of her husband in 1943, won the seat. And I'd like to pay tribute to Bristol has 3 out of 4 women MPs. We allowed one man to take one of the positions. And I do pay tribute to my friends, the Honourable Member for Bristol West and Bristol East, very supportive colleagues. But the reality is, like the rest of the country, we're nowhere near economic or political parity. And so often we do hear about the challenges, and I'm going to mix between the challenges and the opportunities. We do remember that there have been some really good historic achievements that have been made recently, whether that's the Lionesses' incredible success last summer, or the next generation of young women and girls getting into sport, or Kamala Harris being the first female vice president in US history. We await the first woman. Across culture, women are redefining culture in historic firsts in film and television, comedy and sport. Taylor Swift becoming the first woman to win a Grammy for Best Music Video with sole directing credit, and films and shows are showing the varied and multiple lives that women can lead, including Am I Being Unreasonable, which was filmed in my own constituency of Bristol South. Now, Labour have led the way in women's equality since 1923, since we had Margaret Bonfield as the first female cabinet minister, and it's really important that we celebrate the centenary of this accomplishment and the legacy that Margaret particularly left for all women who have followed in her footsteps. But I am appalled, Mr Deputy Speaker, by the pictures, even in 2023, of summits, international summits and events here in the UK, full of men with very little female representation. We look and we think of the women leading political movements, as we've heard again here today, particularly in Iran, and we think of those women in Afghanistan and the Ukraine. Women have always been at the vanguard of social change, but very quickly, as that change starts to happen, we become relegated to a back position, back to the home often, and are very rarely represented in those photographs or in those summits. This week, I was really proud to chair a session of the British Irish Parliamentary Assembly, which we held in Stormont on the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Belfast Agreement. I was able to chair a session with some of the founding members of the Women's Coalition. Kate Fearon, Brona Hines, Dr Avila Kilmurray and Jane Morris were amazing activists well before the GFA, and they remain so today, many using that experience across the world. But women do need to be represented in all aspects of politics, wherever and whenever. We are really fed up of doing that service role and then not appearing in those photographs, in those leadership positions. As chair of the Women's Parliamentary Labour Party, which makes over 50% of Labour MPs, I am really proud to see the successes that Labour governments have made in promoting equality, from introducing the Equality Act to championing all women's shortlists to increase female representation, because Labour is the party of women and for women. And I just gently say to the Honourable Lady for Southend West, when we talk about how lucky we are to be here, to be able to speak, luck has had absolutely nothing to do with it. And I take her point that we recognise that privilege, but none of it has been luck. It's all been power that we have taken, and it always has to be underpinned by legislation. And I'm afraid it is only Labour in government that has enacted that legislation. But even in this place, on a busy Tuesday, Monday, I will.
The Honourable Lady is rightly talking up her party's role in all of these issues, and I would expect her to do nothing less. But surely she would agree that this government has done an enormous amount, more than any other, on the issue of domestic abuse and domestic violence, making women safer online, and I don't think she can simply ignore that. These are the issues of today, and this government is tackling them.
I'm not ignoring it, and I pay tribute particularly to her friend, the Right Honourable Member for Maidenhead, for the work that she led in government. But we do need to continue to use legislation to underpin, and good legislation, and I'm not sure that actually in this week of all weeks we can be proud of what this government has done. When we think about the trafficked women that are coming forward, that is deeply problematic, and that would be good if we can all work together to help those women. Because even on this place, people outside might not know this, but on a very busy Monday, Tuesday or Wednesday in Portcullis House, etc., the place is overwhelmingly male. We see that, although there are some great strides in all these professions, but in journalists, the lobbyists, even from the third sector, people come and see us. I think the environmental movement is overwhelmingly dominated by men. The camera people, staff in most places are generally male. I had a message as we were sitting here today from our honourable friend, the member for Wirral, pointing out to me that yesterday, even at PMQs, all four leaders, of course, are male, but the questions were 2 to 1 from men to women. And that's the stark reality, as others have said, that this place still remains some 30% women. Now, we are celebrating how far we come, and we recognise that the more needs to be done. It's 52 years since that first women's refuge was set up in Chiswick, and the issue of domestic abuse, as we've heard again here today, and violence is still all too prevalent. When we think about marital rape was only made illegal in the early 2000s, and we estimate through the ONS that 1.6 million women are experiencing domestic abuse in England and Wales in any one given year. Now, we know, faced with the cost of living crisis and severe lack of funding, the number of spaces in England is falling desperately short. and why, when this issue is affecting so many, is so little progress being made. Yeah. It is the case that we do need to work harder on this. And it was certainly instructive with those women from the Women's Coalition in Northern Ireland that we were talking with last week, that they were very clear that the only reason really that they could come forward, and women in any conflict situation can come forward, if there is an ecosystem of support, both statutory and non-statutory, operating behind the scenes, that they can both use and come through. And that is sadly missing in many places today. We do need to help fund those refugees. They do need to be places of safety for women to seek refuge from. We do recognise the resilience and strength from women. We recognise that today, and we are so proud to be able to voice on behalf of all those women what they bring to us in our constituencies. Just to close, I think it is often for our friendships with one another that does prove to be our biggest strength. And outwith are absolutely necessary. We are strong political women. We disagree across this House and we work together across this House. But it is a pleasure to be part of this debate today. And what I see when I look around the chamber and when I look in the gallery that we've had today, I see the bonds of friendship that are made between colleagues who share the desire to make life better for women. And I do think that Parliament will be safe in our hands.
Not lose it. Vera Hophouse.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And it is an honour to speak in this wide-ranging debate from local to national to global women's issues. And we have heard some powerful, powerful speeches and contributions. International Women's Day is a time to celebrate the progress we women have made, whilst recognising how far away we are from true equality and from true recognition of women in the law. And I have to say the most powerful speech every year is the one from the member from Birmingham Yardley. She makes us all sit here for minutes and minutes in silence to reflect on the terrible stories that we hear each year of women who suffer domestic abuse and violence. And, you know, I agree, we are still very far from making real progress. I do want to say thank you to the Right Honourable Member for Basingstoke, who always makes sure that we have these discussions every year on International Women's Day, and it is important that we continue to have the debate that we have here in the House. Disrespect for women remains endemic across society. Half of British women have been sexually harassed at work or place of study. Women are 27 times more likely to face online abuse than men. Nearly a quarter of women have experienced sexual assault or attempted sexual assault since they were 16. 1 in 14 women have experienced rape or attempted rape. These are more than just statistics. These are women, these are lives, and every story is a story of trauma and hurt, and something that we all need to recognise for what it is. They are not statistics, they are lives. It reflects the everyday reality of women and girls across the UK. I just want to quickly mention my Workers' Protection Bill, which aims to protect women from sexual harassment in the workplace. Too many people are suffering silently because they feel unable to report it or because their concerns are not taken seriously, and we have heard many examples of that today. My bill strengthens protection for these women by imposing a new duty on employers to prevent their employees from experiencing workplace sexual harassment. The bill would also make employers liable for the harassment of their staff by third parties where they have failed to take all reasonable steps to prevent such harassment from happening. And I have been pleased to see such cross-party support for my bill. However, legislation is only part of the solution. To fight misogyny, a root and branch culture change is needed. Last Friday marked 2 years since the brutal murder of Sarah Everard by a serving Met police officer. Wayne Couzens exposed himself to women just 4 days before her murder. His victims have argued that if their reports had been taken seriously by the police, Sarah might still be alive. The terrible story of Sarah's murder and the police failings, which have been identified subsequently, are still difficult to come to terms with. The first report of Operation Soteria Bluestone found that some serving officers do not think sexual offences should be a priority for policing. It quoted one officer who believes that cases of rape and sexual offences were pink and fluffy. This officer openly admitted to avoiding these cases in favour of burglary and robbery. The new Met Commissioner has said that they are investigating 1,000 sexual and domestic abuse claims involving 100 of its officers. These are more than just bad apples. They are part of a rotten culture of misogyny. Police in England and Wales are recording record numbers of rape offences. However, rape prosecutions are down 70% over the past 4 years. Last year, charges were brought in only 4% of recorded rape cases. This is a national scandal, and we say these things again and again, and we are pointing out every year in International Women's Day that we need to make progress, and we do not make progress. And I do believe the government needs to listen up. Only with a momentous culture shift can we begin to address the concerns and fears that so many women have about engaging with policing and the justice system. Avon and Somerset Police, and I do want to give credit, in my constituency have shown what can be done with a dedicated, well-resourced team and the right leadership. And I hope that Avon and Somerset Police will actually lead by example and take other police forces along. Their team have tripled charge rates and brought more cases to the Crown Prosecution Service. However, much more needs to be done across the country. Nearly half of women have said their trust in the police has declined following Sarah Everard's murder. The government must focus on rebuilding this trust, and we Liberal Democrats are calling for immediate action to ensure that police vetting procedures are fit for purpose to start rebuilding that trust. Violence against women and girls is a global threat. I just want to very quickly come to this point. During war and natural disasters, women face unique dangers. In Turkey and Syria, humanitarian groups have warned that women are finding it harder to access aid and are at severe risk of exploitation. Conflict-related sexual violence, and I do want to give credit to the member of Totnes who has been raising this in Parliament many times, and he's working very hard on it, and he has my full support on this. Conflict-related sexual violence is one of the oldest weapons known to people. It destroys bodies and communities, and its impact is felt long after fighting has finished. The Ukrainian Prosecutor General's office has identified 171 victims of sexual violence by Russian troops. 119 of these are women. I'm sure that many colleagues across the House share my admiration for the bravery of the women of Ukraine, and they have been mentioned here today already. We should not underestimate the substantial trauma that women and children are suffering, especially if they have experienced sexual violence. I also want to remember the women of Afghanistan. In January, Mosul Nabizada, a female MP who remained in Kabul, was killed. Just 4 of the 1,500 Afghan citizens who were eligible for the UK resettlement scheme because they are at high risk after the Taliban takeover have now arrived in the UK. Women and girls were meant to be a priority but have been left without a specific route to apply to safety. This is really a shameful, shameful government record, and nobody can walk away from that. Women all over the world are leading movements against authoritarianism. Many constituents have contacted me to express their solidarity with the women of Iran. I echo this and pay tribute to their courage in the face of atrocious human rights abuses. Many have reported sexual assaults. Let's not forget these women, because only it is too hard to take on these regimes, all led by men. Women's voices have been ignored for centuries. In many parts of the world, they still are. 2023 must be the year that governments around the world listen up and hear us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. It's a pleasure to follow the Honourable Member for Bath. Can I also thank the Honourable Member for Basingstoke for securing this debate? I want to begin by paying tribute to Lady Betty Boothroyd, who was a force of nature in this place, who is a great female trailblazer to us all, who achieved overturning more than 700 years of parliamentary tradition in 1992 when she first became the elected Speaker in this place, the first woman to be elected Speaker in this place. Secondly, I want to pay tribute to some fabulous and successful women in my constituency. Deborah Frimpong, who is the chair of the Moorings Neighbourhood Forum and a formidable community activist. Councillor Avril Leku, the Deputy Leader of Greenwich Council, doing great things at local level to support women and champion their inclusion. Hend Corella, host of the Ladies of the Lake podcast, which amplifies the voices of women who have grown up, worked and lived in Thamesmead. Deborah McFall, the director of Crumbs Bakery, a business that truly brings in and supports the community. Karen Saunders from Green Centre of Mission, who does a lot to support young people in our community and particularly bringing us together when the two young boys, Kiani and Charlie, were murdered in my constituency. Claire Hallinan from Hawksmoor Youth Club, who has delivered fantastic services to young people and wider community of Thamesmead, but has also faced considerable challenges with the states of its facilities. And finally, Catherine Morner, founder of CC Events, who hosts the market in Abbeywood and Thamesmead and has won awards for the role they play in the community. I will now turn to some issues closer to home. I'm very concerned by the rise of misogynistic influencers such as Andrew Tate, whose content sends a troubling message to men and young boys about how they treat women.
Yeah.
I'm particularly concerned that we may see a backsliding on the progress that has been made in schools to tackle misogynistic attitudes if men like Andrew Tate are allowed to spread their hate online. Misogyny should be a hate crime, and this is something I'm proud the Labour Party has championed. There should be no place for toxic influencers like Andrew Tate to spread their hate and encourage violence against women and girls.
Yeah.
I'm delighted to give way.
I have argued for making misogyny a hate crime for so long, and yesterday I was again given the reply that it would just be gesture politics. Does she agree that giving a powerful signal that if misogyny is a hate crime, all crimes will be investigated properly and not just brushed away like we have seen? Making misogyny a hate crime would be a big signal, not just political gesturing. Does she agree?
The Honourable Member for Bath couldn't put it better than what she's just said now. It should be made, misogyny should be hate crime. I really hope the government takes on board what I've mentioned and what the Honourable Member for Bath has mentioned. Finally, I'm proud to chair the Labour Women's Network, which supports women standing for election and advocates for greater female representation within our party and beyond. It turns 35 years old this year. It is in those 3.5 decades, LWN has trained thousands of women for public office, outlawed all male panels at Labour Party events, fought for tougher action on sexual harassment, made the Labour selection process shorter and cheaper, improved parental leave arrangements for councillors, and seen the proportion of women in the Parliamentary Labour Party increase from 9% in 1987 to proud 52% today. Hundreds of women have contributed their skills, energy and occasional range to our movement over those 35 years. But it would not assist at all without 4 women who turned their frustration into organisation. Barbara Follett, Hilary Durlan, Barbara Roach and the late Jean Black. Every day we are thankful for their determination to level the playing field for women. Every day we look forward to the day when our work is no longer necessary because women have equal representation, power, agency and visibility inside the Labour Party and beyond. In the last 12 months, LWN have been proud to have grown in numbers and raw. We are delighted we have now more members than ever before. We are also proud to have trained more women than ever before. Through the LWN Political School and the Jo Cox Women in Leadership Programme, we support women and serve and lead as feminist chainmakers at all levels. Our graduates include my honourable friends, the member for Ashton and Underline, Lead West, Hampstead and Kilburn, Bristol West, Burnham Yardley, Kingston upon Hull, Oxford East and many more, as well as our councillors, police and crime commissioners and the UK's only woman, Metro Mayor Tracy Brayman. More than 54% of women selected to fight seats for Labour at the next general election are also graduates of the LWN training programme. With the greatest respect to my colleagues across the floor, I'm looking forward to seeing Conservative men replaced by talented and diverse Labour women. The architect of our training schemes is the one and only Nan Sloan, whose good advice is to stand firm, take up your space, and never apologise for yourself, rings in the ears of many Labour women during the critical moments in their political journeys. I also like to pay tribute to our director, Claire Reynolds, for her strong leadership and drive for positive change alongside Jane Heggie and Kat Price. Another absolute powerhouse of Labour Women's Network is my good friend, the Right Honourable Jackie Smith. The first ever Home Secretary, we are immensely proud that Jackie has served on the LWN Exec Committee for over a decade now. As she prepares to move into fresh challenges from NHS leadership to broadcasting to ably chairing the Joe Cox Foundation and championing their commission into civility and power life, I want to say a huge thank you. Thank you for showing us what resilience in public life looks like. Thank you for smashing glass ceilings and supporting others too. And thank you for never ever kicking down the ladder and always finding time to encourage your sisters. As well as LWN turning 35 this year, we have another important anniversary to celebrate. 2023 marks 100 years since the first women Labour MPs were ever elected, Susan Lawrence, Dorothy Jerson and Margaret Bonfield. Margaret, a working-class trade unionist and a universal suffrage campaigner, went on to become the first ever woman cabinet minister and the first female privy councillor, largely written out of history since. The centenary of her election provides a welcome opportunity to correct this, as well as running a commemorative event with the Labour Women's Network. And I join calls led by my honourable friend, the member for Wirral South, to see a portrait of Margaret installed in the House of Commons where it belongs. Mr Deputy Speaker, whilst LWN has been busy sorting out women's rights within the Labour Party, the Labour Party has been readying itself to sort out women's rights within the country. Labour is ready to close the gender pay gap. Labour is ready to deliver revelation in affordable quality childcare. Labour is ready to support women and entrepreneurs. Labour is ready to help employers support staff through the menopause. Labour is ready to end the black maternity mortality gap. And Labour is ready to ensure rapist meets justice. With due respect to my hard-working sisters across the House, Labour is ready to clear up the mess that this Conservative government has made of women's rights. It's time for a Labour government. I will close by wishing all my sisters across the House and beyond a happy International Women's Day, and hope we can work together in cooperation to protect women's rights going forward. And I will end by echoing the comments by my colleague, the honourable friend for Birmingham Yardley. We need deeds, not words. Thank you.
Kirsten Oswald.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I'm very grateful to follow the Honourable Lady, who's someone I always enjoy working with, and she is always worth listening to. I also want to reflect on the speech that the Right Honourable Member for Basingstoke gave at the beginning of this debate. I wasn't sure how I was going to begin my own contribution because, to be honest, I'm a bit scunnered. I'm probably more than a bit scunnered. But she set a positive example, and so before I get on to my scunner, I think I will follow on from what she said and reflect a little bit on the fact that women across this House can and do work together positively. And although I have significant political differences with her, with women on the Labour benches and others, I'm really grateful for the focus that all of these women, all of these strong, powerful women, have on issues to do with women. And I'd like to put on the record my great appreciation for colleagues cross-party and the work that they do. I'd also like to note the exceptional speech that my friend, the Honourable Member for Livingston, gave. I thought it was a powerful contribution, the way that she spoke of her constituent and also her lovely mum. And it's been nice to hear the reflections from others about their mums too. I think it's something that, again, we can all agree on. And the Honourable Member for Birmingham Yardley, I think that we all want to be very clear in our appreciation for what she does. It really matters. I'm sure it's very difficult, but these women matter, and the difficulty that their families are facing is something that should never happen. It should never be experienced by any family, and we need to reflect, I think, on that and on the comments that others have made about the headlines that follow these very tragic incidents about family men and so on. And the Honourable Member for Brent Central made some very powerful comments in that regard. Delighted to give way.
Thank the Honourable Friend for giving way, and she spoke of those incredible women who are here today and watching, and the families of those who the Honourable Member for Birmingham Yardley has read out. I have just had the pleasure of spending some time with them, and what was palpable to me was the tragedy that they have experienced, but also the resilience. Does she share my view that they should never have had to face this, and we, as we have heard across the House today, need to do so much more to make sure that there are no lists of dead women to read out.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for what she said. I can't add to that. It's a reality that she's described, and we do have a responsibility to make sure that we do everything we can. So that reality isn't great. Things are not great. Too many families know too well the gaping holes that are left because of male violence against women. So we will keep talking about that. We have a responsibility to do that. And as the Honourable Member for Vauxhall pointed out, we absolutely need to use our privileged platform here as parliamentarians to raise this time and again. I thought it was interesting that the Right Honourable Member for Basingstoke very powerfully spoke about the value and importance of women in public life and the consequent improvements and the way that the increase in women in public life all tie together to bring women's situations more broadly into a better place. I think that's right. She's 100% correct in what she said, and obviously we have many more women in public life now, and I very much welcome that. But I would also reflect that certainly in the time that I've been here since I was elected first in 2015, public life is increasingly polarised. There are challenges now that are over and above the challenges which we would have recognised or identified in 2015. I thought that the Honourable Member for Erith and Thamesmead was correct to bring up her concerns about some of the damage that influencers like Andrew Tate have on wider society, and that obviously has a profound effect on women. We also heard that culture wars, which I think we hear too much about, are not without an impact on women. I think that's absolutely right. And all those who engage in that kind of behaviour should frankly be ashamed of themselves, because they do down and they cause detriment to women, but not only to women, they cause detriment to everyone in our society. Last year I was really struck by hearing members who expressed these kind of concerns. They were fed up, they were worn down by the toxic climate that they found they were working in, and I do think that the Honourable Member for Bath reflected a bit of that this is something that's increasing. Can we in good conscience not point that out? I don't think we can. I think that we should call it out for what it is. It's damaging our democracy and damaging to women particularly. Can we in good conscience ask young women to come forward into what I think is a toxic soup of threats and abuse and misinformation very often? I do ask myself that. However, perhaps there's a wee bit more of the glass half full about me after all. I think we can and we do ask young women to do that. And I say that thinking of the young women I know who are powerful, strong young women, and they will always stand up for women's rights and always stand up for equality. And in terms of equality, the reflection that I would have is that if someone is coming after my rights as a woman, if they're coming after the rights of one group, please be clear that the rights of every other group will be absolutely next on the agenda. And I am aware that I perhaps sound a bit crabbit, as I might be described in my home, and maybe I am an increasingly crabbit middle-aged feminist, but I think I'll be happy to point out that my rights as a woman and my feminism are not imperilled at all. In fact, they're more than likely strengthened by me making sure that I do stand up for the rights of other groups too. And I'm grateful that honourable members have reflected on the situation of women across the world whose rights are in peril. We need to be very clear that rights are not there and carved in stone forever. We've seen that in the USA very tellingly. And we've seen the grave situations where women in Afghanistan, women in Iran are experiencing really terrible situations, and they absolutely need our solidarity, but they need more than that. They need our practical support and assistance. That's our job here. We need to take practical steps to stand with them. Uyghur Muslim women too, forced into sterilisations, labour camps. Women across the world are in difficult situations, and I include in that the women in small boats. Closer to home too, there are policies which cause detriment to women. I was pleased to hear the honourable members for Norwich North and Meon Valley speaking about the future of work and supporting women in work. We need to do that, but we need to realise the reality is there is a 15% gender pay gap, and warm words will not deal with that. That will take concerted action. Action which the WASPy women, which I spoke to, who I spoke to yesterday, are very aware of. These strong women know that there is a problem here, that the situation is neither fair for them as older women, nor will it be for younger women. It is going to take decades and decades and decades for this to correct itself, if it ever does, and we need to accept that reality. I could talk at length about the positives in terms of policy in Scotland, and I'm always happy to do that, as honourable members will be aware. I think it's important that much of that policy does focus on gender and does focus on women. And I'd like to focus a little bit on one particular woman, as she stands down as the first female First Minister of Scotland and the first woman to lead the SNP. I do want to pay tribute to Nicola Sturgeon, who is a politician who has inspired me greatly, and I know that she has influenced many others too. There will be many women and girls who are interested and engaged in politics and public life because of her absolutely consistent and solid support for women, for women's rights, and for making lives better. Hear, hear. And if I can close by mentioning some other women who inspire me, because we need to finish on a positive in these debates, I think. Like East Renfrewshire councillors Caroline Bamforth, Angela Convery and Annette Ireland, who day and daily work hard to make lives better for women. They champion women and girls in all they do, and I'm very, very proud to have them as my colleagues. People like Laura Young, a young influencer who is campaigning hard on environmental issues, including to try and get rid of disposable vapes, which cause problems both to the environment and for young people. And for her pains, she too is involved in this horrible toxic morass of online abuse. And I say shame on all of the people who deal with her like that. She's a young woman who's making a difference to the world. She doesn't have to do that. Women like her will continue to make a difference. None of the online abuse will make a difference. She's going nowhere. And Rahima Mahmood, a Uyghur human rights activist that, despite the challenges she faces, stands up day and daily to advocate for the rights of Uyghur women. And Rena Maguire. You won't have heard of Rena Maguire, but I'm sure you would all be the better for knowing her. Rena is a woman from Barrhead whose community activism spans years and decades, and she has made every effort at every point to make life better for the women in the community that she lives in. So perhaps today we need to say that whilst we have challenges, and there are many, and we shouldn't minimise them, there's also a space for us to appreciate the sterling and tireless work of women like Rena, who make all of our lives better.
Hear, hear.
Opposition front bench. Annalise Dodds.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. It's always an honour to speak in this debate and celebrate the wonderful achievements of women. And I thank, of course, the Right Honourable Member for Basingstoke for proposing this debate and the Backbench Business Committee for securing it. And I want first to associate myself with her remarks celebrating women in this place for all of their achievements. There are so many trailblazers, so many have been mentioned: Betty Boothroyd, Harriet Harman, of course also Barbara Castle, I would mention, Maureen Colquhoun, many, many more. But we need many more. Of course, we need more. We need more. On my side of the House, we are proud, as my honourable friend for Erith and Thamesmead said, of the fact that we have more than half of our representation being female. We need to see that change across all parties. And of course, we also need to see it extend away from this place into local government. And it was wonderful to hear many Bristolian examples from my friend for Bristol South and indeed from right across the country of women in local government. But we need many more. Now, I want to thank everyone who's spoken in this debate today. Above all, of course, my honourable friend, the member for Birmingham Yardley. She delivered, yet again, her powerful memorialisation of the women killed over the past year. And can I say what an honour it was, yet again, to have some members of the families of those individuals joining us today. There can be no starker or more sobering illustration that so many women are still losing their lives to male violence, and that far too many others are still living in fear of it. Compare our situation in safety here to the situation those women remain in right here, right now, in our country, in their homes, in their workplaces and on the streets. I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for Kingston upon Hull North, who spoke so authoritatively about the behaviour of male perpetrators and the need to end impunity for them, including when they commit gateway offences like exposure, as she stated. And I'm also very grateful to my honourable friend for Vauxhall. She was absolutely right. We should call a spade a spade. We should call a murderer a murderer. As the Right Honourable Member for Thurrock rightly said, these are not soap operas. They are despicable crimes. These are despicable criminals we are talking about. And that must always be the case in the broadcast and print media, as my Right Honourable friend for Brent Central so powerfully set out in her contribution. Of course, it must also be the case in social media, and I would associate myself with the remarks from my friend for Erith and Thamesmead. We must have stronger action against violent misogyny online, and I am afraid the Online Harms Bill is simply not tough enough to deal with that cancer in our society. And we need more action on policing and in other areas of criminal justice too. Police-recorded rape and sexual offences are at record highs, but just 1.5% of recorded rapes lead to convictions. Over 2/3 of women have experienced some form of sexual harassment in a public space. 86% of 18 to 24-year-olds have. The criminal justice system, I'm afraid to say, is in disarray. We all know that as constituency MPs. We see it through casework every single day. And women's refuges are full when they are still open. Women and girls are being put at risk. And many of us will question, as was questioned earlier, why there's no mention of making Britain safer for all in the Prime Minister's 5 key priorities. Now, no one believes that ending violence against women and girls will be easy. But we certainly can't do it with short-term sticking plaster solutions. We need a comprehensive approach. That's why Labour set out a cross-cutting Ending Violence Against Women and Girls Green Paper. That sets out a plan to embed action across every government department. It includes proposals to create a new street harassment law and tougher sentences for rapists and whole-life tariffs for those who rape, abduct and murder. It includes domestic violence specialists in every 999 control centre. It does include making misogyny a hate crime. It ensures that we would have compulsory vetting of police officers in every police force, that we would give victims access to the justice they deserve. We really cannot delay. And we can't delay in other areas that are critical for women's lives either. Previous Labour governments did not delay. They created the Equal Pay Act, the Sex Discrimination Act and, of course, the Equality Act. Well, we're determined to go further, to match that record and go beyond it by putting women's equality at the heart of everything we do. And we will start by taking action on the gender pay gap. It's disturbing. That gap has actually increased by 12% in the last 2 years alone. ONS statistics. We need proper action to eliminate that inequality for women. So I'm delighted to be working with my honourable friend, the member for Leeds West, and Francis O'Grady, to review how we can go further and faster to close that gap. We need action for flexibility for women in the workplace, so it's not just in the hands of their employers. We need equal pay comparisons between employers, not just within one employer. And we need a modern childcare system, as my honourable friend for Houghton and Sunderland South ably set out today. Now, I want also to talk, as I have the floor for a few more moments, about a group of women who rarely get a hearing in this place. I'm talking about midlife women, women in their 40s, 50s and 60s. Those women experience a series of great pressures, often expected to hold down a job, care for elderly parents, support older children as well. The pressures facing them are immense. But when you look at how those women are faring economically, you see how they have been moving backwards over recent years. In the last decade, women in their 40s and 50s saw their real wages fall by almost £1,000 a year. And since the pandemic, 185,000 women aged between 50 and 64 have left the workforce at a cost of up to £7 billion to the British economy. Yes, happy to.
An excellent point. And would you agree with me that it really is quite astonishing that the government doesn't look at this issue the way that we have, and is concerned about the growth in the economy, loss of women from the workforce in particular, by not looking at social care and looking at childcare? And would you agree with me that if they want to steal our plans, they are welcome to do so, and we will cheer them on?
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. I would be delighted if the government stole those plans, also if they looked at Labour's measures for the NHS, because 1/5 of those women are on an NHS waiting list. And having been up and down the country and talked with women on gynaecology waiting lists, women not getting breast cancer referral on time, women who haven't been able to access cervical cancer screening with falling rates, we see how big a problem there is and how our plan for the workforce is so urgently needed. We'd also love the government to steal Labour's plan for menopause action plans for larger employers, a measure which many businesses have welcomed and which so far the government has not yet adopted, but I hope they may do from the actions and nodding of the Minister on the government benches. We need action there, and we need greater action for women. And women need answers to these questions because, sadly, too many women will feel they have little to celebrate this International Women's Day in our own country. And sadly, that applies even more in many other countries. As, of course, we discussed throughout this debate, I had the immense privilege earlier in the week of taking part in a round table with women activists from Iran and Kurdish women. Their strength is inspiring. What they have been through, however, is absolutely horrendous. We must indeed stand with them, as was said earlier. And we must stand with the women of the United States following the attacks on their bodily autonomy. We must stand with the women of Afghanistan and of Ukraine. And we must stand with the women in countries subject to appallingly high rates of femicide, like El Salvador. We must stand with those women from all nations where women's lives are devalued. I want to close by stating that my mission as the Shadow Secretary of State for Women and Equalities is to ensure that every woman is recognised, valued and empowered to reach their full potential. I want us to be able to look forward to these debates in the future, where we can focus solely, in the week of International Women's Day, on the brilliant achievements of women and girls in all their diversity, those women and girls who make this country great, rather than having to detail so many barriers, Mr Deputy Speaker, that are holding them back. Thank you.
Minister Maria Caulfield.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I start by thanking Right Honourable and Honourable members for their contributions this afternoon, and particularly the Right Honourable Member for Basingstoke for securing this debate and her work every day of the year championing women's rights, and all the members who spoke so passionately today about the issues that they're campaigning on behalf of women up and down the country. But as the Right Honourable Member for Basingstoke pointed out, there have been many women that have gone before us, that have led the way to many of us being here today. And I know the Honourable Member for Erith and Thamesmead, I think, mentioned Baroness Boothroyd, but we also have women such as Margaret Thatcher, the first female Prime Minister, who broke that glass ceiling. And unlike the Shadow Minister, I'm not afraid to compliment and to pay my tributes to opposition females, because for me a personal heroine was Mo Mowlam, and the Honourable Member for Bristol South talks about women being erased from photos and often others taking the credit for their hard work. Well, Mo Mowlam was instrumental in delivering peace for Northern Ireland and is very often forgotten when we're talking about issues around the Northern Ireland Protocol and the work that was done, but she is very much remembered for the work that she did. And also the Right Honourable Member for Chelmsford said there's a special place in heaven for men who stand up for women. And today I particularly want to remember Sir David Amos, who would always usually have spoken in this debate, and for his work particularly on endometriosis. And I'm sure he'd be very pleased to see his successor, the Honourable Member for Southend West, taking part in this debate as well. And it was great to see the Father of the House, who has sat here through most of the session this afternoon, listening to women about the issues that we are facing. And we're very lucky to have such a Father of the House that respects female members here. For International Women's Day yesterday, I was particularly pleased that so many government departments were able to showcase the work that's been done and make announcements in tackling the issues facing women, many of which were raised today. The FCDO launched yesterday its first international women and girls strategy, which highlights the work that's been done globally to tackle the threats to gender equality across the world, whether that's climate change, crisis, conflicts, coronavirus, disproportionately affecting many women in certain parts of the country. And honourable members have talked about Iran in particular and Afghanistan this afternoon. And there is significant work that's going on to support women across the world. And in particular, I want to touch on the issues facing the women of Ukraine, because I had the great pleasure and honour of meeting the First Lady, Mrs. Zelenska, this year. And while, of course, planes and weapons and resources are important, her plea to us in this place was to make people aware how rape is being used as a weapon in war against the women in Ukraine, the young girls, women and older women as well, elderly women who are being raped as a part of the war against Ukraine. And I'm pleased that the UK has cemented its position as a leading global actor to stand up for those women who are under attack. Now, we know the scale and severity of gender-based violence in the times of conflict and insecurity, and I'm proud the UK is recognised internationally for the Preventing Sexual Violence in Conflict initiative, committing £60 million to prevent and respond to conflict-related sexual violences since 2012. And last November, the UK hosted the PSVI International Conference in London with over 1,000 delegates and secured new political declarations with 53 countries and 40 national communities. And that is incredible work to be being done. But I think the debate this afternoon really focused domestically on the gender-based violence that women and girls are experiencing up and down the country. And we heard, of course, the very moving speech from the Honourable Member for Birmingham Yardley, who highlighted just the sheer scale of women that have been murdered in the last year. And also from the Honourable Member for Kingston-upon-Hull and the terrible, tragic case of Libby Squires. And the Honourable Member for Livingston, who told us Wendy's story about her daughter Amy. We cannot be failed to be moved by that. And yes, of course, we are doing great work in improving the experience of women. We've announced rape crisis centres in England and Wales have been awarded a grant to set up a new national phone support line available 24/7, which launched on the 7th December. We are providing £27 million to recruit more independent sexual and domestic violence advisors. But clearly, despite all of that, there is a significant problem, and that's why violence against women and girls was put in the Women's Health Strategy, because it's not just a criminal issue. It's not just a justice issue. And I was pleased to see the Minister for Victims and Sentencing here this afternoon, and also the Honourable Member for Derbyshire Dales, the Home Office Minister, to hear just the staggering problem. I will give way.
And I've listened intently in this debate, and it is an honour to be able to serve alongside such fantastic women representatives across the House. But the Minister is talking about eradicating sexual violence and domestic violence from society. Does she agree with me that we shouldn't be rewarding in any way any perpetrators of domestic abuse and sexual violence?
Minister. I absolutely agree with her. It's why we've put violence against women and girls in the health strategy, and I'm really keen that as we're coming up to our first anniversary of that we now move towards making that our priority for our second year and working across government, and I'm happy to work across party as well, because this is such a significant issue that with the amount of strategies, plans and significant funding, let's be fair, we are still not making progress in the areas that we want to be. When we're hearing about the list of, and I'm particularly struck by the Honourable Member for Brent Central. The way she described, the way language is used to describe both female victims but also their perpetrators, as to justify that this was just something that simply happened, it was a mistake, it's not that significant. That has to change, and it's about changing the culture as well as putting in the infrastructure to support that. And I'm really keen that we make progress in the next 12 months on that.
I'm very interested by the remarks that she's just made, and in particular, going back to the point of putting violence against women and girls at the heart of the health strategy. If we're really serious about increasing the rate of convictions for rape and sexual violence, and indeed domestic violence, women report being treated like pieces of evidence. And what we really need is a therapeutic, wraparound therapeutic support for victims, so that they aren't actually re-traumatised every time they're trying to get justice. Will that be very much part of what she's doing?
Absolutely, we do need to look at how we support women, and I think we've had female MPs in this place, thinking of Rosie Cooper, who simply left because of the experience that she had and just didn't, she's gone on record to say she didn't feel safe continuing, and that absolutely goes to the point of supporting. I don't have huge amounts of time. I will give way a couple more times.
I'm very grateful. Very quickly, what the police is saying is that they need to actually move away from looking at the victims as a credible witness and move to the perpetrator. Too often, a perpetrator gets away while the police is actually investigating the victim.
I absolutely agree, and I think that's about changing culture as much as it's changing the kind of structure of services, and we've seen plenty of evidence of that. And just want to pay tribute to the Honourable Member for Bath for her private member's bill that is going through, that it will tackle sexual harassment in the workplace, and she's done tremendous work on that, and we should pay tribute to her and hope it makes swift progress in the other place. But I do also want to talk about the online threat, because that has come up too. I will give way one more.
On tackling violence against women and girls, the issue of spiking is one that has unfortunately been coming up in my constituency. And in order to catch the perpetrators, it's really important that victims come forward really quickly and give the physical evidence, like a urine sample, within 24 hours. And I wonder if there's more that she could do using her voice to get that message out to victims.
Absolutely, and that's why this needs to be a cross-government approach, and working with Home Office, the Justice team as well, so that we can have a united voice in that. But specifically on, I will just give away one more time. That will be the final.
I really appreciate your generous time on this. I just also wanted to put on record the work that Sister Space has done, particularly with Ari Law, in terms of looking at victims of abuse, particularly black victims. Your predecessor started to do some work with me and Sister Space before the change in government. Would you please continue doing that work?
Yes, absolutely, very happy to do that, and we can certainly arrange to meet following this debate. But the groundbreaking online safety bill, I know the Shadow Minister was slightly dismissive of it, but actually my right honourable friend from Chelmsford, who has reported back that the UN Special Rapporteur on Violence Against Women and Girls has highlighted our online safety bill as world leading, and many other countries are following the progress we're making on that and may indeed take up similar legislation in their own countries, because this will tackle criminal activity online, protect children from harmful and inappropriate content, and view the rise of misogyny online and how we can stop that. And I think there's been several comments in the debate this afternoon to highlight how important that is. In terms of business, the UK is now successfully including gender provision in all of our free trade agreements since leaving the EU. Our trade agreements with Australia and New Zealand have all got dedicated trade and gender equality chapters, and again, that's groundbreaking work there. In terms of our domestic business focus, our Task Force of Women-led High Growth Enterprise was established last summer because, and I want to pay tribute to the Honourable Member for Meon Valley here for her work in the APPG as well, not just in terms of her pushing STEM in women, but also the high growth sector work that she's doing. Because we know that if we deliver more women to set up their ambition, we will improve growth in our economy, but also improve the outcome for those women as well as they thrive in the workplace. We know that childcare is an issue. That is why we've spent over £3.5 billion over the last 3 years in early education entitlements, and we've increased the funding of £160 million to our local authorities this year, be 180 next year and 170 million the year after, so that we can allow local authorities to increase their payments for childcare to local childcare providers, because I recognise the challenges and the costs that childcare puts on families, but also the providers themselves, how difficult it is to sustain that business model. Now, just briefly turning to the women's health, because I am proud that in the last year we have published the first women's health strategy for England, and we have, and the Honourable Member for Vauxhall particularly mentioned this, and I'm very keen, particularly on maternity disparities, that we make progress in that space. But we've also appointed Dame Leslie Regan as the first Women's Health Ambassador to lead the work. We announced yesterday we're investing £25 million to roll out women's health hubs across the country with a one-stop shop for women's healthcare needs. We're also going to be levelling up IVF access, firstly to same-sex couples, but across the board, so there's a consistent provision across the country which doesn't currently exist. We've got the launch of the HRT prepayment certificate from the 1st of April, cutting the cost of HRT by hundreds of pounds, and we aim to be announcing our pregnancy loss certificate later this summer so that babies born before 24 weeks can be registered, which is such an important issue for those parents that have lost babies. The major conditions, we'll look at long-term conditions such as heart disease, musculoskeletal conditions and dementia, the leading cause of death in women that for too long have been ignored. I want to finally touch on girls' education because it is a top priority for us, both internationally with our commitment that we want to provide 12 years of quality education for every girl, because that's the best way to get girls and women out of poverty, but also our commitments domestically, because the Prime Minister in his first speech set out his ambition of ensuring that all school pupils in England study some form of maths to the age of 18. The Honourable Member for Thurrock raised the issue of teaching materials in schools. The Prime Minister here yesterday committed to a review of that, and we will look forward to what that shows. But we need to get more women and girls into science, because while we have seen, as the Right Honourable Member for, I'm having a brain fog moment now.
Chelford.
Basingstoke. Brain fog moment. Despite us getting more girls into STEM A-levels and undergraduate courses, we only see women making up 29.4% of the STEM workforce. And that's why we've got our STEM returners pilot. There's 75,000 people with experience or qualifications in STEM not working in that sector, mainly women, that we want to return to practice. So I hope that showcases some of the work that we are doing across the board. There are many challenges. We're not denying that. We're not shirking from that. But we are making significant progress, and particularly domestically on violence against women and girls. I hope this time next year we'll have a better story to tell.
Dame Miriam Miller to White.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. And can I say an enormous thank you to everybody give my thanks to everybody who has taken part in the debate today. And I think this is a debate that always demonstrates how much agreement there is across the House. I always see more heads nodding on that side in this debate than any other. And my final comment, therefore, would be, Mr. Deputy Speaker, let us not allow party politics to get too involved in some of these issues, because they're not about party politics, they're about changing the culture of our country to make sure that women have the same opportunities and the same barriers as men, not different ones and not bigger ones. And I think the more we can keep the politics out of this, the more progress we make in that culture change. And I think the vast majority of this debate today has demonstrated how much agreement there is, and I would applaud that and thank colleagues for taking that approach.
Question is as on the order paper. As many of that opinion say aye. Contrary no. The ayes have it. Could now change quietly and quickly, please. We now come to the debate on brain tumour research. Derek Thomas to move.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker, and I'm hopeful for some nodding heads on all sides of the House as well, also for this debate this afternoon. And can I thank you, Deputy Speaker, for the opportunity to speak, and also thank the Backbench Business Committee for making this time this afternoon. But I particularly want to pay tribute to those families around the UK today who are living with a brain tumour diagnosis. When I meet some of these families, what I see is an enduring